Here's what actually happened.
This the foundation of all knowledge.
Money. I'm really mad that
what difference does it make, right? What
Stop. Stop.
the deregulation of the industry is obviously going to cause more of that industry.
And to lubricate the trust connection between people until they have enough.
Yet we could still look at biological reality in determining who's a female, even if there are.
Why don't you denounce feminism the same way you're denouncing capitalism? If you don't...
For something to be objective, it needs to be verifiable. And you can't verify...
If I make a claim as a political pundit, it is true that I definitely could be wrong. Yeah, you're promoting, right?
Ideology is the main tenet of politics, right? This is my ideology.
So, 2015, anyone go back and watch the footage? The first GOP debate.
Cool, Robert. Oh, that? With a crowbar, you said?
And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. I am Sara, the Raging Tomato, here bringing to you live another, I was about to say Moderator Monday. It is not Moderator Monday. Today is Sunday. Holy crap, the days are going right by. This evening, we are discussing the topic, is evolution real? I have Jed, the Flying Spaghetti Auditor, and of course, made by Jim Bob here, both to debate the question. Jed, if you'd like to start with your opening statement, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Sara, and thank you, Jim Bob, for agreeing to a debate. Today, we're discussing whether or not evolution, the cornerstone of all biology and modern medicine, is real. I will be arguing for the affirmative that yes, evolution is demonstrably real. I'm not going to be making an argument from authority by pointing out that 99% of experts in biology accept evolution, because that's a fallacy. Instead, I'm going to rely on the preponderance of facts and evidence which are all in accordance with evolution. So what is evolution? It's simply put, it's the change in allele frequency over time, or in other words, the change in inheritable characteristics in a population over multiple generations. This change is the result of non-random selection of random mutations. Some mutations are beneficial, some mutations are deleterious, most are neutral. But the beneficial mutations, which enhance an organism's chance of survival until reproduction, are more likely to be passed down to the next generation. Most creationists already accept evolution. They have to, because A, it's a demonstrable fact about reality, which can be observed both in a lab and in nature, and B, because without it, they can't fit all the animals aboard Noah's Ark. There's not enough room for every reproductively isolated species on board the Ark, so rather than claiming the Ark had billions of individual organisms, creationists appeal to super fast, rapid microevolution, which happened after the flood, to explain our current biodiversity. God magically created a couple different kinds of animals which are subject to microevolution within their kind, but prevented from evolving too much through some mysterious nebulous force. I'd like to posit that my opponent actually has somewhat of a burden of proof today. He needs to demonstrate that this nebulous force exists and where the boundaries are. What exactly is a kind? Under the creationist model, where every animal kind was magically created at the beginning of history, we would expect to find every animal kind in the oldest rock layer. This should include humans, modern birds, dinosaurs, Pachycetus, modern whales, but instead we find different organisms specific to certain rock strata, representing a slow change in phenotype throughout the geologic column. For example, if we look at whales or cetaceans, we see a very slow and gradual evolution from land-dwelling mammals to modern whales, starting all the way back 50 million years ago with Indohyus and Pachycetus, through Protocetus, Durodon, which is the last common ancestor amongst all whales. Now, you might have heard of Pachycetus, but there's a long list of over 15 different fossils, which all represent that transition from land-dwelling mammals to modern whales. Now, when placed in order, these fossils exhibit a slow and steady change from four-limbed land-dwelling mammals to exclusively aquatic modern whales. Modern whales have tiny little pelvic bones. Now, Durodons have tiny little back flippers moving backwards in time. Each cetacean ancestor has bigger and bigger hind legs until we get all the way back to Pachycetus, which can fully walk upright on four limbs. Modern whales have a blowhole on the top of their skull. With every regressive fossil, this hole can be seen getting closer and closer and closer to the front of the face, eventually reaching the very tip of the snout like we see in Pachycetus and most other land-dwelling mammals. Dolphins are included in the cetacean family. Dolphins have one blowhole, which converges internally into two nasal passageways, just further showcasing the evolutionary history between dolphins and other whales. So what, you might ask? You place fossils in a random order and make up a story. Well, the order is not random. The order is determined by the geologic column. What a coincidence that when you line up organisms in the order you find them in the rock, they showcase gradual and steady change over time. We can also look at human or hominid evolution. We start here with Homo sapiens, which date back around 300,000 years. We can go back to Homo erectus, Homo habilis, Australopithecus. Throughout these lineages, we see a progression of flatter faces and bigger brain cavities. Footprints and long femurs suggest bipedal walking began about 7 million years ago, slowly and slowly becoming more and more similar to modern humans as time goes on. Our closest living relative is the chimpanzee, which not only looks the most like us amongst all the other organisms on Earth, but also shares 96% of our DNA. Evolution is not a ladder, it's a branching tree, and scientists debate about the exact placement of certain fossils all the time, with the evolutionary tree constantly changing and adapting. The more data we collect, the more accurate our understanding of evolution becomes. Unlike religion, which starts with a conclusion already in mind and cherry picks evidence to support it, science is all about improving our model based on newer and better information. The theory.
Oop, that was my fault. Hold on.
Can you still see me?
Hold on.
Lost my face for a second.
I'm trying to mess with your mic settings because for some reason it's going out.
Let me try this.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I
have some
normally
wireless
don't
headphones I can try
interrupt.
on.
I normally don't try to interrupt opening statements to fix audio, but it kept going out so much. So this is my deepest apology to you.
Oh, you're good. How's the audio now? Is that any better? Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's not going on the yeah. Yes, I think so. Hopefully, we'll try it.
Yeah, sorry about the audio. I don't know what the issue is, but I got a few other options I could try. I just want to close by saying the theory of evolution is an ever-improving model supported by all the best available evidence and contradicted by none of it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, I apologize. That one seems a little clippy on the audio. It's kind of got a little clip sound coming to it. While you adjust, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jim Bob. And then before we kick off into open floor, we'll go ahead and just do a mic check and make sure that's coming through. Jim Bob, to you, sir. You're muted. You're muted.
All right.
Yeah, you're muted.
Okay, got you. What is evolution? My opponent said evolution is the changes in allele frequency over time. However, that's not actually what the claim of evolution actually is. The claim of evolution is that it's a process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. Changes in allele frequencies is merely an observation. That can't be the theory itself. That's one observation. We are not just speaking about adaptation. We are speaking about the macro claims that species we see today come from an entirely different type of animal. That is what's entailed in the evolutionary view. So the claim is that the natural phenomenon of diversity we see today. Is someone typing?
Yeah, sorry about that. That was me. Yeah, I can try to mute my.
Yeah, just mute your mic. Yeah.
Sure.
Let me see. So the claim is that the natural phenomenon of diversity we see today is produced by an evolutionary mechanism. That means that evolution is responsible for producing populations, because populations is one of the observations, diversity in life. Now, my opponent actually has to tell us and explain in biological terms how it is evolution produced the phenomenon populations. Now, what happens most of the time, and you'll see it here tonight, in order to talk about evolution in any meaningful way, the opponent has to actually grant himself populations first. He can't actually develop populations from evolution. He needs populations to talk about evolution. The issue is the evolution proponent can't argue for evolution without first granting himself those things. Evolution also assumes that mutations produce accidental phenomenon and functional mechanisms. Accidental mechanisms that serendipitously provide survival advantages to the population. What do I mean by specialized? Let's take the liver, for example, which filters and facilitates the expelling of toxins in the body. Evolution proposes that this is produced accidentally from a series of random mutations. Is there any reason to believe that a series of mutations would result in a mechanism just coincidentally being awesome at filtering toxins? No, there's no reason to believe that. Now, if something as specialized as a liver is the product of many generations of mutations within a population, this means that considerably more previous generations survived and reproduced just fine without it. Without a liver. They actually had to produce a liver, and the amount of time to produce a liver from random mutations, they would need to be already existing and totally fine, reproducing, defending themselves, consuming energy, living. It's multiplying, right? Now, keep in mind, all vertebrates have a liver. Now we have to assume that many different branches of vertebrates all accidentally developed liver systems without any knowledge of its future function. If you go from a single vertebrae, you have the problem of needing to develop those essential structures like a spine. So vertebraes are one problem. Now, vertebraes, considering that it's something like 5 or less than 5% of all animals are vertebraes. Keep that in mind. So they all have a liver that has to develop from evolution, right? The problem with evolution proponents is that they take a very broad approach to the story narrative. They sell you chapters of the book, and when we ask for details of how the chapters occur, they just present a new chapter of the book. They don't tell us how it happened. They tell us that it happened. You saw that in his opener. Now, there's also a philosophical issue with evolution. The entire paradigm of evolution relies on the term species. However, if everything is a common ancestor and every group we call a species is in flux and was once not a species and it's on its way to no longer being that species, then there's no real thing in nature called a species. And there's no possible way for my opponent or anyone else to determine when one species emerges and from a previous one. It's all this constant flux toward ever-changing masses of globular biology. That's all that's happening, right? Because there's no way to determine when a species emerges from a previous one, my opponent can't actually utilize the term species. Now, he does it colloquially. He says, humans, look at us, we're a species. And I go, are we a giraffe? He says, no. Were we once not a human? He has to say yes, right? So what do? They pin you in just human, similar to monkey, similar to chimp. They look at the biology, they say similarity, that proves evolution. Well, I'm sorry, but it's also the case that evolution proposes that humans come from very dissimilar things to humans. So it's not a win to say, look, that thing's like us. We must come from that thing, because you have to prove that we also came from things that are completely dissimilar, both in phenotype and genotype, perhaps. So what happens is my opponent will do it tonight. Instead of evolution proponent telling us mechanistically how this happens, that's what science is, how something happens. They say that it happened, and then they shield themselves and drowned you all in incomprehensible levels of gradualism. He'll say fossils, the view is that fossils prove evolution. No, fossils demonstrate similarity between things. That doesn't demonstrate how one thing becomes another over time, or one thing comes from another thing. That just says things are similar, right? That doesn't tell us anything about the mechanism. The worst part of evolution is it's touted as a scientific theory, as my opponent mentioned at the end there, but it doesn't even make its way through the scientific method. You'll learn that you would learn in 5th grade. Now, I would say that if you said something was a scientific method in natural science, surely one of the first things we would ask is, cool, let's take it through the scientific method. Well, I've done this debate maybe 500 times, and not one of those times has my opponent actually taken evolution from an observation to the conclusion, which develops a scientific theory. Now, what they do is they use scientific theory or science as a general statement, a colloquial statement about things, and then they assume everything else. They can't tell you from an observation how they get to a scientific theory called evolution. I will note that, again, when he opened, he said evolution is simply changes in allele frequency over time. That's clearly not the case, and not the fullness of the position at all. And I'll end by saying that might be your first observation. If you wanted, you could start with that first observation and try to make your way through the scientific method. I guarantee that you won't.
Fair enough. Thank you so much, Jim Bob. And as a kind reminder to the audience, we are going to get through the debate. Then we will do closing statements. We will read and respond to your super chats. I will put a caveat out there that we might end up having to do $10 and up, since Jim Bob and I are both connected. You guys usually kick it off really big with the 5s. But sometimes it just becomes a little overwhelming, and we'll be here all night reading them. So I will still display them up front, but when it comes to responding, it might just have to be 10 and up. So keep that in mind before you send. Jed, I'd like to do a quick audio check with you.
Yeah, sure. How am I coming through now?
That's still a little clippy too, isn't it?
I have I have another microphone I could try out.
Let's see. Let me try reduce again. Do a little sound test with me again.
How are we sounding now?
Yeah, it's still clippy. So is something connected to your phone, or is it Bluetooth?
Well, right now I just switched my settings to Bluetooth headset, which is my I believe it's the mic I have connected to my phone. I also have headset earpiece.
Oh, he's going in and out, is he not?
Whoops.
Yeah.
So now I'm on.
Ooh, we might have it. What's that one?
You switch the mic there?
Yeah, I'm trying to switch it over to my Bluetooth microphone. How does it sound? Horrible?
It's a little clippy.
It's clippy. I don't know why it's so clippy though. Yeah, it's
Yeah, at the beginning. Wired headphones. I can try those one more time. See if they're any better. Yeah, sorry.
okay. That's okay. It happens. It's okay. It happens to the best, and it's better that we do this now than try to get through an entire 2 hours with it. And you're using the phone, so I'm trying to figure out Bluetooth wise what would cause it to like clip like that.
All right, how's the sound quality now? Any better?
Mm-hmm.
It's not clipping, so far. So
okay, good.
But was this the one that was going fishbowly while he was doing the opening statement, though, right? Because it was fine backstage, and then once he started.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is the same method I had backstage, and then it became bad later.
Yeah.
We'll start with it, and we'll see what happens. I noticed it was when your verbal volume started going higher that it started doing the weird fishbowl thing. But we'll give it a whirl and see what we can do.
Okay, right on. Yeah, if it's still bad, then I'll try something else again. Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, no worries. All right, gentlemen, I leave the floor open to you.
Yeah, I would just ask first, Jed, do you believe that evolution is a proper scientific theory?
Yes, definitely.
And do you believe that proper scientific theories need to be at the tail end, a product of the scientific method?
A theory as robust as evolution should surely have multiple experiments that showcase the scientific method behind it. So not just one experiment, but multiple.
Yeah, but the question was, if something's called a scientific theory, is it required to go at least to go through the scientific method?
Sure, that sounds reasonable.
Okay, and do you think evolution can make it through the scientific method?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I've seen you use this tactic before, and maybe I can satisfy your need to have evolution go through the scientific method. So evolution, for example, has predictive power, which is a huge part of the scientific method. I believe it was actually Charles Darwin who predicted we would find Archaeopteryx in the fossil layers between dinosaurs and modern birds. And then sure enough, when we look in the when we look in the layer of rock strata, we find Archaeopteryx, along with multiple other fossils that showcase a slow and steady transition from dinosaurs to what we call modern birds.
Okay, but that's merely an observation of something you found. If someone guessed where something is, certainly if I guessed where a star would be, and I was right, it wouldn't follow that what I presume to be the cause of what made that star appear in that place wouldn't be satisfied scientifically. So that's why I wanted to be a little more rigorous here.
Sure.
What would be the first step in the scientific method, Jed?
Yeah, so observation. The observation isn't the results of the experiment. The observation is modern birds with theropod dinosaur fossils. Then the hypothesis is when we look in the rocks in this layer, younger than dinosaurs and older than present day, we will find Archaeopteryx. That's the prediction. And then the experiment is digging into the rock strata. And then the results is finding Archaeopteryx. And then the conclusion is the best explanation for this is that Archaeopteryx represents a transitional form between dinosaurs and birds.
Okay, so your observation is you found two things?
Yes.
Okay, but I thought you did the digging was the experiment. It sounds like you started with what you're calling the experiment.
Well, so like I said, it's not just one experiment. So
no, this experiment. No, stick to this experiment. You said the observation was we found. Hold on. The observation was we found these things. We dug up this thing and found it. Right. We predicted to find this thing. Right. But you already dug up the thing. So the thing you're looking for, you already had an assumption of what you're looking for, right? So the reason I ask what the observation is first, right, is because when you make an observation, the question in science, in natural science is, well, what caused this phenomenon? What causes these things, in this case, to be similar, right?
Yeah, maybe I can clear something up. So prior to this experiment, we already have theropod dinosaur fossils. And then the prediction becomes, we will find Archaeopteryx. And then the experiment is digging in the rock strata between modern day and where we find dinosaurs, and that's where we find Archaeopteryx.
Okay, let's stay there then. So the observation is we have something. The hypothesis is we want to find something else. We find the something else, and then the scientific theory is what?
So the conclusion of the experiment is that most likely theropod dinosaurs evolved through Archaeopteryx into modern birds.
Wait. Isn't evolve the thing you're trying to prove?
Right. That's why it's at the conclusion and not the beginning.
Wait, no, but the question is, how is it, if you're going to claim something evolves from one thing to another, the question in science would be, how did it evolve? Not stating that it did again. It sounds like you're saying you observed one thing that exists. You look for another thing that's similar to it. And because you predicted something similar to it, that means it grew from that thing. But I have a defeater to this, is that how would you know that you didn't just find something that could have just as well lived alongside of the thing that you're looking at now?
Well, one reason that we can know that is that these organisms are only found within certain layers of rock. So if we expect that all animals lived at the same time, like under the creationist model, we would expect to find dinosaurs, Archaeopteryx, and modern birds all at the very earliest rock layers.
No, that's not the question, because it couldn't an event like a volcano immediately bury a bunch of animals that would have otherwise lived alongside the other ones?
Being buried by a volcano is potentially one way that you could come about having a fossil.
Wait, I didn't ask.
through
I didn't
quick
ask.
burial.
I didn't ask how fossils are made. I asked, is it possible for natural events to bury different types of animals and kinds of animals at various different layers, right? Drastically in a quick moment.
You cannot bury different organisms within different rock strata at one time. That's the whole. So I don't know if you've heard of the law of superpositioning, but this is basically the principle that newer rock layers are on top of older rock layers. So certain sediments take a long time to form into rock. So the lower you dig, the older the rock gets. And we can test the age of the rock through radiocarbon dating.
Wait a second. Well, the reason I use a volcano when it comes to dating, when volcanic material erupts, everything you know about carbon dating actually resets to 0 when there's an eruption.
Yeah, and in that case, we would expect to find a bunch of organisms that are all the same age, right?
Well, we're talking about whether or not other variables can mess with what you assume the time frame is, but that's not even what's in question here. What's in question is, how do we take evolution, which is the assumption, I hope you take this other synonymous definition here, the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the Earth. That's the claim, right? So I want to know, okay, that's a biological claim, right? That's like saying this animal we have today is the product of a different thing that wasn't this animal over a long period of time. That's the claim. So what I wanted to know is, what's the observation? Because I would grant you the observation of like diversity of life, right? Let's say, would you agree that populations themselves would be an observation that you could start with?
We can observe populations, sure, absolutely.
Okay, so you grant that populations are an observation to kick off the scientific method. And so the next question, if I look at populations of animals that are all diverse, wouldn't it be fair to ask within the evolutionary paradigm to say, what caused this type of diversification? Populations, right?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And so, then the next question after that becomes, if we have multiple different populations, we know that some populations are related to each other because they can interbreed.
No, wait. Hold on a second. Hold on. We're not asking what might be related. What we're asking is populations themselves would need to be the product of evolution. But if you say things are related, you're already granting yourself populations.
Would you agree that within populations, certain animals are related to each other? Like domestic dogs, for example, are they related? Are they part of the same kind?
And the standard for relatedness is genetic makeup, phenotype, genotype? Because you would also say that we're related to a banana, right?
I would. I'm asking you, do you think domestic dogs are related to each other?
If the presupposition is everything's related, then saying...
I'm not presupposing that.
You just said it.
As an observation, would you say that we can observe certain animals are related to each other, like domestic dogs, for example?
Yeah, that they're similar in a type of family, if you will.
Okay, so you think that all domestic dogs are in the same kind?
In a category. They are a universal category. Would you agree?
A universal category. I'm not
like
sure.
Like a dog. Like if I said, what's a dog, you would know what I'm referring to, right?
Maybe. Well, you could be referring to the domestic dog, which is a species, or a canidae, which is a family, which includes things like wolves, foxes.
Yeah, let's go to the bigger one then. Let's go to the canidae.
Great.
If the canines, you would say canine is a universal category, right?
It's a family. It's a label that we put on a bunch of organisms.
Okay. Is it objective or is it ever changing? Is it static or changing?
Our understanding of it changes.
No, not your understanding. Does the thing itself, if evolution was true, there was once a thing that wasn't the canine family, right?
There used to be things that weren't canines, yes.
And became canines. So you're saying that a universal category, under evolutionary view, a universal category, canine, actually came from a universal category that isn't canine, right? That's the claim.
Yeah, certain traits and characteristics evolve over time. Yeah, that's my claim.
Can you tell me which universal category came before the canine, and where and how you know the switch happened?
Yeah, so within canine evolution, carnivorians evolved about 50 million years ago. And this is thought to be the split between cat-like descendants and dog-like descendants. Caniforms are the dog-like, feliforms are cat-like.
Now, that's a claim, right? That's the assertion. So how do you know the moment a universal category, what'd you call it? You're using the Latin, right?
No, this is just the scientific name, carnivorian.
Carnivorian. How did you determine when the shift happened between carnivorian and canine?
Well, you can never pinpoint a moment because evolution happens across populations over many generations.
That's an assertion. Like, what did I say in my open? I said, you're going to get drowned in incomprehensible levels of gradualism, a story about the past. You say, oh, this came from that. And I go, how do you know that? And you say, we can't know. And I'm asking, why would you make a claim that you can't know?
Do you think that dogs are all descendant from wolves? Do you think a wolf is the ancestor of all modern domestic dogs?
Domesticated? Yeah, I would call that a type of engineering.
Selective breeding, right?
Well, we can manipulate that, and yeah, sure. We could demonstrate the manipulation, but it doesn't not become a dog. What's in question isn't whether or not things are in the same family. I'll ask the question again. Why would you make the claim that carnivorian is a universal category of an animal that precedes but morphs into the canine? And I ask you, how is it you know that? And your answer is, I don't, because it's too gradual.
Well, so I don't know if you've heard of the law of monophyly, but this is basically the principle that you can never outgrow your ancestors' clade. So once an organism is a carnivorian, it stays a carnivorian forever. Once an organism is a dog, it stays a dog forever. You can't grow out of your ancestors' clade.
I understand.
If you move backwards in time, you can find organisms that don't belong to the same clades that we do.
I understand what you're saying. It's not the thing itself, the category itself morphing into a new category. I understand. But what you are saying is that there is a distinct category called carnivorian, and then that category either continues to exist alongside the new category that's branching out for it, or it dies out, right?
Modern dogs are still considered carnivorians.
So the category shift didn't happen.
What do you mean it didn't happen?
If canine is also the same category as carnivorian, you're making a distinction with no difference then. So you're saying a species branched out from another one, but now you've collapsed the species.
Have you ever heard of taxonomy?
Yes, it's an arbitrary way of categorizing things in the here now, but falls apart when you do look at large schemes of time, which I'm demonstrating.
Well, I agree with something you said in your opening, which is that a species is kind of a fuzzy subject. It's not like a really concrete idea, because different organisms, while they may look, like the same species, we might consider them different species because they live in different areas. We never see them breeding, or they're incapable of breeding with each other through like reproductive barriers, or they can reproduce, but they make infertile offspring. So the question becomes, if you agree that all dogs share a common ancestor, you understand that one organism can evolve and diversify into other different looking organisms. You can get everything from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane, a huge amount of variety, all from one common ancestor. So you agree with the mechanism.
No, you contradicted yourself. You said the term species doesn't really exist. It's kind of fuzzy. And I agree. Under the evolutionary view, it's actually completely arbitrary and fuzzy. You can't even tell me where one starts, one ends. But then in the next sentence, you say dogs, that's a universal category that you're assuming is a type of species that does in fact exist in its way. But you said organisms. Well, are organisms groups of populations, or are they nominal? Is it a distinct is there only one type of dog that it's itself? Does that make sense? There's only whatever you call a dog. There's 10 dogs. Are you arguing that those dogs aren't actually a part of an objective group, only a ostensible group that we just for the sake of taxonomy put in the same category, but they're not actually in the same category?
We make categories or clades of animals and organisms based on their common ancestry. So we make, say, like the clade of Canidae, where all canines come together. We know that all canines share a common ancestor, which I think you agreed with, or at least you agreed domestic dogs share a common ancestor. And so every clade you move back towards is a common ancestor, and every organism that belongs to that clade shared the same common ancestor. So, for example,
that's what you're saying is the case, but I'm asking a different question. You keep referring to these universal categories that you also deny actually exist. So I'm trying to get to, is it the case, just a yes or no, is it the case that a thing called a category like Canidae or a dog, is it the case that that actually exists as a category, or is that a fuzzy morphing category that you can't really put brackets around?
It's an interesting question. Humans like to put things in boxes. We like to label things and categorize things. And life sometimes doesn't really care what we think. We can do our best to categorize animals, but then nature can surprise us.
So the question is dog, let's say dog, because there's giraffe, there's dog, there's elephant. We don't argue that these are the same things, right? To talk about them, we reference them in universal categories, and in the universal category, right? But then underneath that, we subcategorize them, right? So
right, exactly.
Okay, but for the sake, I understand for the sake of doing something we think is making order out of the animals. I'm not asking whether or not it's useful to categorize things. I'm not asking if humans like to categorize things. I'm asking, in the evolutionary view, is a category of a thing like dogs, like Canidae, like carnivorian, are those actual categories objectively, or are they in flux and changing?
These categories are labels that humans have made up to put animals in boxes. And the categories could be different if humans decided otherwise. A lot of the categories or clades that we come up with are based on the fossil record and whether certain organisms share characteristics with other organisms.
Okay. So would you argue that evolution posits that there's a thing called speciation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we've observed it.
Okay, hold on. If premise one is species is an arbitrary bracket system, totally made up by humans arbitrarily in time, and is ultimately fuzzy, that you can't really have access to this species, you think you're calling a species. But you're also saying that evolution relies on speciation. How is it that you can rely on speciation if you actually deny the objectivity of a species?
So one common definition of a species is an organism that's reproductively isolated. And so when I use a term like speciation, typically what I mean is here's one organism that diversified into two groups which have become reproductively isolated.
Okay. So if humans, a bunch of humans that look a certain way, share a bunch of traits, suddenly can't reproduce with all the other humans, are they no longer human?
No, you always remain a human because you can't grow out of your ancestors' clade. That's the rule of monophily. So we would still all be humans, but maybe we would form some new clade to call these reproductively isolated humans.
Well, I'm saying they're always going to be a human until they die out. Okay, so if they're always going to be human until they die out, how is it that one, under the evolutionary view, isn't it the case that one clade actually branches off into something entirely differently? Like, are you an ape?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So are you.
I'm an ape. Is George Floyd an ape?
George Floyd is an ape, yes, or was an ape when he was alive. Yeah, we're all apes. All humans are apes.
Okay, so if we're an ape, so if you think we're an ape, why do we make a distinction between human and ape?
Well, one thing, we're reproductively isolated. So humans and say like gorillas, when we think of the colloquial term of ape, we can't reproduce and create viable offspring with gorillas. That's one way that we can determine.
Hold on. Okay, hold on. But now you're in a contradiction, because I just used the same hypothetical and I asked you if there's all these humans right now, and there's this new mutation or whatever that produces a bunch of humans that can't reproduce with all the previous humans that produced it. You said that would still be a human, right?
No.
But now that's is that a new category, or right? What is that? Because now you've made a distinction between ape and human, but now you said if the new human arises from the same process that the human arise from the ape, a new human. You're saying it's still a human, but when we emerge, right, we're humans now, right? Why human?
Well, so like another category we could look at is primates. So humans and gorillas are both primates, but we can no longer reproduce. We're still primates. So like if someday two groups of humans were completely isolated, like say people go to Mars and then there's no travel back and forth for millions of years, we would still call them humans. They'd still belong to the clade of hominid, but they might diversify and we might call them some new species.
Okay. And do you have any reason to believe the humans we have today could branch off into a subcategory that's still called human, that you'd still grant is human, but can't reproduce?
The only way I could think of that happening is some isolation event, like if humans travel to Mars, for example. But in the world we live in now, there's so much travel and there's so much interbreeding amongst humans, the possibility that we could ever become reproductively isolated with other humans is incredibly low.
Okay, let's get a little more granular here. Do you believe that something as functional as the liver was produced by whatever mechanism you're assuming is evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically your argument appeals to irreducible complexity. That the liver could not have evolved. Oh, sorry.
No. I'm arguing that I'm not arguing something can't happen. I'm actually just getting what your position is. And are you saying random mutation produced a liver?
Yes.
Okay. Would you agree that the liver serves a very specialized function?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Are you saying that a random process produced a very specialized function?
Yes. Now that always happens in gradual stages. So turning back the clock, we can see one, and I'll fully admit I'm no expert on liver evolution, but when we look at, with any complex organ, we can see it slowly and gradually evolving over time. So another common example creationists will point to is the human eye as something that's irreducibly complex. You can't get an eye because if you remove one part, then the whole thing becomes...
I'm not making that argument. I'm actually would rather you stick to what I'm cross-examining here, which is if you believe random mutation produced a liver, you're saying that some random process produced hyper-specific tasks within a body. But not only that, but the liver itself as an isolated item also works in conjunction with other highly specific, hyper-specific, accidental, task-oriented mechanisms. What I wanted to ask you is, if it's the case that evolution produced the liver gradually, notice how he went back to the incomprehensible level of gradualism. If it's the case that a liver was produced from random mutation to specialize in filtering toxins and expelling them from the body, isn't it true that whatever earlier organism produced this through random mutation lived a long time without the liver?
So my understanding is most invertebrates do not have a liver, and most vertebrates do have a liver. Is that true? Yeah.
That's correct.
So we have plenty of organisms that don't have livers and manage to survive.
That's not the question. The question is, if you believe that the liver was produced through random mutation over many, many years of time through many, many populations, isn't it the case that whatever produced the liver accidentally also lived without the liver for many, many years?
No, because evolution happens not within one organism, but within a population. So you're not going to have one individual who lived without a liver and then with a liver.
Mm-hmm. Wait, well, no, it would necessarily be so that even in populations, there is a population that must precede what we now call the vertebrates. So if it's the case that evolution produced the liver, that means that the liver once didn't exist, in simple terms, yes?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
And we still have organisms living alongside those which don't have livers.
I understand, but we're not talking about those organisms because we're looking at organisms that live without livers, right? Are they producing a liver?
Not that I know of.
Okay, we're talking about the one that you claimed ended up producing the liver and the mechanism that produces a liver. If your mechanism to produce a liver is mutations over time, I'm asking a very simple question here, which is, if evolution, the process of random mutation within populations, produce the final form of what we call the liver, right? That does what the liver does. Isn't it the case that that whatever ancestors, in this case you'd call them ancestors, didn't those ancestors not have a liver? It's a really simple question.
Yeah. If you go back far enough in the evolutionary history, you'll find organisms without a liver.
Okay, and can you tell me from the evolutionary standpoint, given that you're appealing to random mutation, natural selection, how it is, mechanistically how it is? Not that it happened over time, but mechanistically, how is it that non-liver organisms produce accidentally a functioning liver?
I can tell you the mechanism, which is, you've already said it, random mutation selected for by natural selection. So if an organism produces some sort of proto-liver or some sort of really simple way of filtering toxins from its body, it's going to have a better time surviving. It's going to have a better chance of survival if it has some rudimentary toxicity filter. And so that rudimentary toxicity filter evolves over time through more and more random mutations until eventually you get to a modern.
I understand you're saying that it did happen though. Well, that first step, right? You said if you have an organism that has some sort of proto-liver, now you're giving yourself a proto-liver. It asks the same thing. How does an animal accidentally, through random mutation, develop a proto-liver from not a proto-liver?
You just said the mechanism. It's random mutation guided by natural selection.
No. Mechanistic. Look, if I asked you how does if I asked you how does a an espresso machine work, right? You wouldn't just say a term. You would actually go into the schema of it mechanically. The engineers could explain how it is mechanistically. I'm asking you a more precise question.
Sure. So whenever an organism reproduces, albeit asexually or sexually, there's going to be copying errors in genes. So when a gene copies itself, sometimes it copies itself incorrectly. Sometimes it switches an amino acid with something else. Sometimes it duplicates itself or deletes itself. So there's all these mutations, and that's the mechanism through which new organs and new characteristics can manifest.
I know, but you're saying that they can do that. Like specifically, how is it the case that random mutations in this case specifically produce a proto-liver that becomes even a better, more specialized liver? Take me through you're just telling me the chapters of the story and I'm asking for the mechanisms. Like, so if I said, how are cars produced? And you said, well, there's a plant that makes them. And I would say, how are they produced? Like, what is the process in which a car is produced? You'd have to break down all of the conveyor belts, all of how the parts are made, what they're made of, how they operate together. You're just saying that a liver was produced and appealing to some sort of like mysterious journey of an organism in a population that just for no reason develops the capacity to process toxins, when in reality, the same organism that accidentally produces something to process toxins was alive enough to process to not be affected by toxins for long enough to process a new thing. So it's like, why is it that an accidental process giving something an advantage that it doesn't actually need? And right, you're appealing to mutation. So this, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to pause you right there. So you said mutations that it doesn't actually need. Now, I think that's where I might interject, because a beneficial mutation is going to enhance the chance of survival. So if a mutation happens and it enhances the survivability or enhances the likelihood an organism is going to reproduce, then that trait is going to become more highly distributed amongst the population. So it's not like all the ones living alongside it that don't have that trait immediately die off. Sometimes you get divergent evolution where one new trait forms, and that's when you have a speciation event. So the organism prior doesn't instantly go extinct because a new trait manifests.
I understand that, but even other evolutionary proponents agree with me that you're actually just looking after the fact, after the story is told, and say, look, those sharp venom fangs that deliver venom, those were accidental, but in the long term, they were very advantageous. But that's a different statement than saying they were developed for advantage. Well, they weren't, because they're accidentally developed. So you can't have a teleological view of purpose, or lowercase telos, like, oh, I got to develop this lung to process oxygen, or I got to develop this liver to fight toxins and transform them and expel them. The organism, from your view, doesn't have any direction. It's, first of all, the step toward proto-liver, even if I granted that first part of the story, it's accidentally producing a proto-liver, right? Each next phase of developing the proto-liver is also an accident. So it doesn't just go, oh, look, this is working. Why? Because these organisms don't have evaluation systems. They don't evaluate from the evolutionary view. They don't evaluate the enhancement of the system. Actually, it's just as likely that another mutation from this view offsets the trajectory of a developing liver. Now, the problem with your view is just the liver as an example demonstrates how nebulous this process is. But guess what? That has to develop independently, but also alongside, in parallel, in conjunction, working together with all of the other organs in our bodies or other vertebrates' bodies, including the heart, blood vessels, super highways to deliver things, processing the ability to process hemoglobin and the rest of it, right? The brain, we don't even get into the brain. The problem here is Jed here can't even tell me mechanistically how. He tells me that it happened, but I ask, how does random mutation produce a liver? He says, natural selection and random mutation. How does it produce a liver? Mechanistically. How is it go from point A to point B?
If you're asking me what organism had, or what's the specific gene that had a mutation that caused a liver, I don't know. I'm not an expert on liver evolution. So that's a really hyper fixated example, and I'm not going to be able to give you a really detailed answer about liver evolution because I don't know. Now, you said something, you mentioned how evolution does not act with intentionality. And that's absolutely true. Evolution does not have an intention. So you never see an organism think, oh, I could really use venom in my fangs, so I think I'm going to go ahead and evolve those. No, so the venom in the fangs is another instance of random mutation resulting in a beneficial adaptation, which allows the organism to more sufficiently defend itself, which allows it to reproduce more.
Yeah, I know. That's just another story, though. Like, that's the thing is, like, if I said, oh, look, a venomous snake has a very hyper-specific combination of proteins, right, that not only develop inside glands, the snake needed to develop the glands. So do they develop the glands accidentally and then accidentally pack it with what happens to be perfectly suited for dissolving the inside of rats specifically? Why couldn't it be the case that they developed a B12 shot, Jed?
Yeah, a lot of animals will have evolution where they're evolving alongside each other, like an evolutionary arms race, where like a rat and a snake or might evolve in ways where I don't know if this is a perfect example, the rat might get faster and faster at avoiding the snake whose venom gets better and better. So you have different organisms. One might be a prey animal, one is a predatory animal, and they're in an evolutionary arms race where they're constantly evolving better and better tactics to either stay alive or defeat their opponent.
Jed, I'm sorry, but that is assuming intentionality. Tactic
absolutely.
No. Tactic means that there's towardness. So is the tactic to survive?
The likelihood that they survive is the non-random selection of random mutations.
Do things accidentally survive, or do they develop tactics to survive?
Animals develop characteristics through random mutations, and then natural selection makes them more likely to survive with those characteristics and pass them on to their offspring.
I understand, but that's not the question. I understand your view on random mutation, which is, I would say, you're consistent with the evolutionary view generally, which is animals accidentally, through random mutation and natural selection, develop things that at the time they don't even know will be or are advantageous. And because they're advantageous accidentally, they're able to survive longer than the other ones who don't have it, right? Even though there's tons of snakes that don't have venom that survive just fine, the question is, well, they also develop some technique. Well, the problem is with the view is like you have to choose. You either take an approach that all of it's accidental with no purpose, that removes that there's an actual purpose to the heart. That means you have to say when a heart is stops working, it's not actually dysfunctional, right? From your view?
No, organs. If an organ stops working, then we could call it dysfunctional because it's no longer operating how we would expect it to.
Well, not just expect, right? Because the heart has, like the liver, it's not just how we expect it to operate, but that it operates with a specific purpose in the context of the body. It's not just randomly operating in various nominal epiphenomenal ways that we can't track using induction. it operates in a very specific way. I'll give you a little example here. When a surgeon works with some biotech firm to develop a fake heart that's nearly identical, would you say they developed something that with a purpose and a function?
Sure, yeah, because they're mimicking a biological organ.
But they're mimicking something that, under your view, doesn't actually have purpose and function. It has an accidental behavior, right?
These accidental behaviors accumulate over time. So you're looking at the end result of billions of years of evolution and saying, look how hyper specific the function of all these organs are, and they all work together in this amazing way. But that's simply because there's been so much time.
So much time. Every time. Does
you
time
cause...
hold on. Jed, does time cause milk to spoil?
Milk spoils over time.
No, I didn't say whether you require time. I'm asking, does time cause milk to spoil?
Time is a necessary component, but it may not be the cause.
Well, it's not the cause, because I could put milk in the fridge, right? Time goes by, it doesn't spoil, right?
Well, it will eventually, right?
Okay, well, different times, right? Generally speaking, when we're referring to spoiled milk, you leave milk out, there's a certain time frame in which it spoils. The reason I'm bringing this up is time doesn't cause things. Time allows for the thing you're claiming is caused. And I think we agree there. But
so you mentioned this notion of incomprehensible time. So little changes can add up into big changes over time. So here's an example. So if we look at the way mountains form, I don't know if you believe in plate tectonics, but when plates smash into each other, they can form mountains. And we can track the height of a mountain. It might grow 2 or 3 inches every year. So these are really small incremental changes. You're looking at those changes and going, there's no way a whole mountain that's 5,000 feet in the air could ever form with these little changes. There's no way these could ever add up over time. But just logic alone tells us that if you add 2 inches over 2 inches over 2 inches, eventually you get to a 5,000 foot mountain.
Jen, I appreciate the attempt at the analogy, but there's no function of a mountain. We're talking about hyper-specific functionality inside biology, like a liver and a mind or a brain and a heart that does very specific tasks. Now, the body is super complex with a lot of components, a lot of which we don't even fully understand. And so the mountain forming from some sort of disaster or plate movement is not even close to analogous to evolution causing over a long period of time hyper-specific tasks with otherwise unrelated particular elements of the body. For instance, when the liver develops, is it developing with some sort of communication, even if it's pure biology, with another thing called the developing heart? Like these things you said work together, right? Inside the body, they work together as a holistic system. But evolution reduces to a nominal view, which is to say you're only really looking at particular things doing particular things. So a particular part of the body is doing a particular thing, even granting your deep time over a long period of time. The section that you would in the future call a liver would finally become a liver, right? Would be over time, but it would be unrelated to the other things growing, and yet they need to work together. So yes, even though didn't come prepared to make the irreducible complexity argument, I would argue that it's on you to explain how independent, unrelated particular mechanisms develop hyper-specific functionality unrelated to each other, but in conjunction with each other. How does evolution do that mechanically?
Well, again, you're looking at the end result of billions of years of evolution.
It's not end result, though.
It is. We are the end result of billions of years of evolution.
No, we're not. We're not evolving right now. The heart isn't on its way to being something else. Okay, so
I don't know if it's on its way to being something else, but everything is constantly evolving.
That means that you can't say there's an end result. To say there's a heart that does
I never said there was an end result. Well, sorry,
is it possible that
what I'm saying is that you're looking at hearts now as the end result.
So, okay, cool. So you don't take an approach that there's a thing called a human being, and all the parts in the human being serve, for the most part, a clear function. Even the ones we might think are vestigial or ambiguous, it's likely that we might look further and maybe see a function in the future. But for the most part, our kneecaps, the joints, how the joints are lubricated, the movement, our necks, our brains, they all serve a function to the whole,
Yeah,
right?
it's
It just
amazing.
works.
Yeah, it's amazing how evolution can form this
No, that's begging
incredibly
the question.
complex.
That's,
it sure is.
Yeah, no, I would
I
no.
want-
It said you said it's amazing. I would actually be amazed if you could tell me how it happens.
Well, I've tried articulating the mechanism. Let me try a slightly different approach. So, since you believe that dogs have diversified from wolves, we talked about that earlier. What's the mechanism through which you can get new characteristics of dogs? So, like, say you're trying to breed a new type of dog. How did the pug evolve from a wolf? Can you explain that?
The pug evolved from a wolf, just crossbreeding.
Crossbreeding.
Yeah, they have to be able to have sex. Like, so you go, hey, this tiny little dog can have sex with something similar. And it goes, oh, yeah, you can do that. It shoots out this ugly mutt thing. And then you keep doing it and you get surprised at what it spits out. You know what I mean? It's like a kid's toy. The problem is you're still talking about that inside a universal category that you denied actually existed, right? So the question, Jed, isn't whether or not you can take an existing category and splinter down a whole variety of things, even to a useless dog that could barely walk, like one of those like hot dog dogs.
The reason they're called dash hounds. The reason I bring up the dog is that, and I think what you were trying to describe is selective breeding, where you take, say, a population of wolves that have, maybe you take the two smallest wolves and you breed those together. They have a litter, and then, amongst other dogs, you take the smallest dogs, breed them together. You take the dogs with the shortest faces and breed them together. So you're breeding for these traits that you want to see, and you're exacerbating the existence of these traits over multiple generations.
Jed,
That's
I would call that. Would you?
Works.
I would call that degradation, though. Would you?
Degradation. What do you mean?
Are you so if you start with some pure animal, right, and they're breeding with each other.
Pure animal.
Okay, I agree. Under the evolutionary view, there's nothing called an actual species either. So, but let's just say you have wolves, right? You're saying wolves are not the same as chihuahuas, right? In this hypothetical, they're not the same. They're not the same dog, right?
I'm asking you how you can get a chihuahua from a wolf. Do you think a wolf is a pure animal?
No, the word pure, I'm not attached to the word pure. What I'm trying to say with that word is that there's a distinct group you call like wolves, right? There's a little category over here. And maybe you see another thing that's dog-like that shares traits and characteristics. And you say, that's kind of like that, but it's not that. You're asking me a question about some type of engineering. What I'm saying is that when you do all this crossbreeding, what that is human beings doing it. There's people doing it with intent, where they get some sort of different form or combination of the animal. What I'm arguing is if that's evolution, are you saying that animals crossbreeding with other animals that it already can crossbreed with is what produces new species?
It can if they're isolated long enough. So there's evolution by natural selection, and then there's evolution by artificial selection, and that's the case with dog breeds. So you call it degradation, I think, because the pug has a worse chance of surviving in nature in the wild on its own compared to a wolf. So you might say, oh, it's less suited for survival, and that is probably entirely true. But it's still a form of evolution because we're taking traits and making them more and more prevalent in daughter generations.
I don't agree with that. I would say that what that is a type of engineering.
So like artificial selection is a form of engineering, sure, but it's biological engineering. We're manipulating evolution in order to get certain results. But in nature, selection pressures through nature are the selection. That's what chooses these random mutations.
Can you give an example of a selection pressure so I understand exactly what you mean by that with an example?
Yeah. So we could say animals that live in the Arctic tend to have white fur. Polar bears, Arctic fox, snow leopards, snow rabbits. All these animals that live in the north, in the snow, they develop white fur as an evolutionary advantage to survive and blend in better in the snow.
Let's stop there. Are you saying each of those different animals that you would say some of them aren't even in the same, quote, family, taxonomically we're speaking, right? You're saying eventually they come from the unifying ancestor, right? That's the view. I'm saying everything you just listed that has white fur. Are you saying that all of those animals at different times, based on their geography, happen to accidentally have the same mutation in the same geographic location that turns their that turns their hair white?
White. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, cool. So what's the, hold on, because I want to make sure you're making that claim. You're claiming that a random mutation that you can't isolate or track in differing animals on different paths of their evolutionary process had the same completely random genetic mutation that also completely randomly produced a random effect. No, you know what I would say as a better explanation of that, Jed, is that their bodies already included the information to participate in that type of location. That wasn't a mutation that accidentally by chance produced a collection of unrelated animals having in a time frame the same exact epiphenomenal effect on their in their fur. It's more the case that the animals already have it encoded in their DNA to have that type of fur. You couldn't tell me each of those animals you just claimed, you couldn't tell me where a mutation that was random actually produced that effect. There's no way.
Yeah, certain genes code for fur color. And so in any given litter of an individual, like say a bear has a litter of bear cubs, some of them might have slightly darker fur than others. And so the ones with lighter fur have a better chance of surviving in snowy environments. And so over multiple generations, you get lighter and lighter fur until eventually the fur becomes completely white. And this is called convergent evolution because it can, a lot of times we see convergent evolution amongst different populations of organisms. They're all developing the same trait because they live in the same environment. It's the same thing with heat resistance if you live in the Sahara or any other trait, or any other environment.
Okay, sorry, but you're not understanding the problem here. I actually just said what you just said. I said that those animals, if it's their genetics that's informing, encoding and instructing the type of fur they're producing, right? That's what you're saying? The genetics informs the type of fur they have, right?
Any population is going to have slightly different variables in the way their fur looks. You're saying that
Please answer the question. Please answer my question.
What was your question?
Is it the case that the genetics of these animals inform the fur color?
Phenotype affects phenotype, yes.
I didn't ask because we agree. If it's the genetics that informs this type of adaptation, whether it didn't exist before and it does exist now, all you're pointing to is existing genetic information that informs what color the white fur is. The question I asked isn't whether or not these animals have genetics that inform the physical trait. What I asked is, how do you determine a random mutation produced that genetic section and that they all did it independently, right? And they all did it randomly. It was a total accident.
Sure.
That all of those animals.
You're appealing to they already have the genes to have white fur embedded in them, and then
that's the observation.
Yeah, and then the snowy environment is making this gene that's laying dormant in them become more prevalent. That's what you're saying, that the gene is already there. So we know
we're both agreeing. We're both agreeing that the genes that are there inform this phenomenon.
The difference between what I'm claiming and what you're claiming is that I'm saying that these genes are new. They're the result of mutations. You're claiming that these genes are embedded, say like a bear. Every single type of bear has the ability to have white fur. It just needs to be in a snowy environment long enough. And then the fur will become manifest.
No, I'm not
it's
saying
already in the genome, is what you're saying.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying if you put any animal. Now, maybe using your deep gradualism, maybe it
I didn't say any animal, but.
Well, I'm saying, like, I don't believe that you can just do that. I'm saying that I agree with you. The observation we agree with. The observation is the types of animals that have white fur in the Arctic plains share some characteristics and a type of gene that informs the white fur, right? It's a genetic thing.
Yeah.
White fur, white environment. Great. The question I'm asking isn't whether or not these animals have white fur. The question I'm asking is, how did you know that it was a specific type of mutation that occurred from not that mutation to this new mutation and produced alongside of one animal, many unrelated animals, not in the same family, produced how did you determine that it was a specific mutation for each of those animal families that produced this?
Yeah, I'm happy
How did you
to
determine?
So the idea that every organism within a population shares the genes to have every kind of hair color that variation has is ridiculous. We know that that's not the case. So with humans, for example, there's certain genes where we have two of them, like we have two copies of our genome. So you might have the genes to have brown eyes and blue eyes, and because brown eyes are dominant, you're going to showcase brown eyes. But if you only have those two, then you're missing genes to have green eyes. So we know that within a population, there's organisms that have some characteristics and organisms that have not that characteristic, or I should say, there's organisms that have the genes to have blue eyes, and some organisms don't have that gene. Many people have two brown-eyed genes, and so they don't have the genes to gain blue eyes and given in a new environment. So these are genes that aren't present in all organisms.
I understand, but isn't it the case what you're referring to is epigenetics?
That's what you're referring to. Epigenetics is where the environment, epigenetics is where the environment makes a dormant characteristic that the animal does have the gene for.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a very direct question. If you know the difference between the epigenetics and what's referred to as like a random mutation that occurs that alters fundamentally the DNA code itself, this is what's in question, and you're actually just assuming the answer. If there's two things next to each other, a group of animals that all have some epigenetics, right, going on, that doesn't fundamentally change the gene. It changes something epiphenomenal within the organism that is still genetic versus a random mutation that would fundamentally change the gene, and then downstream from that would have to produce white fur in this case. So I'm going to ask you, what's your methodology for distinguishing in the case of white fur between epigenetics and random mutation changing the gene?
Sure. So my understanding of epigenetics is that within one specific individual organism, the environment determines how that genes are expressed. So if epigenetics is responsible for, say, a polar bear having white fur, if we take one individual polar bear and put it in an all black environment, we would expect the fur to turn black. But that's not what we see. We have polar bears with no snow around. We see we see zoos with polar bears with no snow, no white objects around, and the polar bears stay white because it's not epigenetics that makes their fur white just because they happen to be in the snow. It's because it's their genes only allow for white fur or slight different variations of different shades of white fur.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying also that it is epigenetic for that particular group. That means it's epigenetic and not some sort of like dramatic mutation in each of that family, right? To me, it's even more likely that, to me, it seems more likely at least. I don't know how I would determine this, but the likelihood. But it seems more likely to me that how we understand epigenetics would actually account for the white trait inside those animals, rather than each of them independently, completely unrelated to each other. The lower likelihood chance of each of them having the very specific mutation, but not just the specific mutation, one that produces a very specific phenomenon like that. Would you at least agree that's insanely unlikely? But it just,
no, absolutely not. Because
how is it likely?
Because they live in an exclusively white environment, like polar bears and Arctic leopards, and they live in this area that's all white. They live in the snow all the time. So blending into their surroundings is going to be a huge survival advantage. All across the animal kingdom, we see organisms that camouflage into their surroundings. That's a huge benefit.
No, Jed, that's assuming that the animal already has it coded to know how to respond to it. Saying that it was a mutation. Hold on. Yeah, that's what you're arguing. Look.
I'm arguing for random mutations is the result, is the mechanism by which we arrive to white fur.
How do you prove that snowiness produces a random mutation that produces something related to snowiness?
If we take the polar bear, we can falsify it. We can test it by falsifying it. So if we're going to test epigenetics, let's take a polar bear and put it in a black room, and we would expect it to turn black.
That's not the question. No. Forget epigenetics.
That's what you're asking me. How do I know it's mutation and not epigenetic? That's exactly what you asked.
I'm putting.
And so the way we test that is by falsification. So if it is not random mutation and it is epigenetics, we can take a polar bear out of the snowy environment, put it into a zoo in a black enclosure, and we would expect its fur to drastically change codes,
Dude,
but we don't see that.
You're not even arguing with the majority of the evolution proponents right now. You're saying that an organism or a population being in an environment are more likely to have the environment actually inform the animal on how to have a random mutation that helps them.
That's fundamental evolution. That's called natural selection.
No, that's not. That's not. No, Jed.
That's what natural selection means.
That's wrong. Natural selection is this. You have a view that through random mutation and sexual selection, animals produce accidental features that over time, looking back, aid to their survival. Natural selection isn't that if you put an animal or a group of animals in a certain environment, that the environment will then say, do something, right? And then the animal's like, I don't have any intentionality, but wait, I'll wait for something random to happen to my body and also randomly produce an effect that helps me in the snow. That's actually not even what the take of natural selection is. Natural selection is a post hoc view of why it is we see the animals here today is because they randomly produce things outside of their own will or relationship to the environment directly, that over time aided them accidentally. They're not a part of it. Otherwise,
the aiding them part, that's not accidental. So the only thing that's random within evolution is the mutations. But nature selects for certain mutations based on survivability. That's
different. That's different than cause. No, that's different than causing. You're confusing two things. In one statement, Jed, you're saying the cold weather and the whiteness caused, like sort of provoked a mutation. No.
Let me clarify. The whiteness in their environment, the snow, was a selection pressure. And then that made lighter furred animals more likely to survive because they could more easily blend into their environment. And so the selection pressure selected for traits that had whiter fur. So the white fur survived, the darker fur died out.
Let me just make sure you understand the distinction. Do you agree that saying weather and climate and environment cause a mutation? Do you agree that that statement's different than random mutation causes an animal in the future to survive in the location? Two different statements.
Yeah, so the environment doesn't cause the mutation. The environment causes animals with a mutation to be more likely to survive.
Okay, and you're saying that the randomness of that mutation occurred in the same time frame for a bunch of unrelated animals.
I don't know what the time frame is for them.
Well, they're coexisting right now and they're unrelated, right?
Yeah.
So the answer is yeah.
They are related. So all the ones that we've talked about so far are mammals, for example, foxes, wolves, polar bears, snow leopards. So these are all white animals that live in snowy environments. So yeah, they all did convergent evolution because they're all filling a similar environment.
And do you agree that a mutation that starts the process, something like developing white fur, requires that also the environment they're in stay the same, such that at the end of their task of accidentally developing white advantageous fur, that they are still in an environment that is white, right?
Yeah. So if the environment changes, then they're going to have to, the organism, if it's going to survive, will have to evolve to fit that new environment.
Okay.
And we see that all the time.
Okay. Do you agree that adding the necessary component of environment, right, needing to stay the same over a long period of time is an added variable that goes against the likelihood of evolution? Do you agree with that?
It goes against the likelihood of evolution. No, it's fundamental to evolution.
No. Let me explain it again. There's a population of animals that you're saying has random mutations that might or might not produce some advantage, right? Fair?
Yes. Okay.
They live in an environment that if that environment stays, the random mutation, if they hit the lottery, will be advantageous over time, right?
Yeah, sure.
If this environment changes, it won't be advantageous necessarily.
Right.
So isn't the environment, the fact that, is it true that environments change?
Yeah, absolutely.
Doesn't that increase the variables for evolution to play out?
It sure does. Yeah, evolution.
Okay, hold on. I'm almost done. Doesn't increased variables increase unlikelihood?
No, not in this case.
Okay, not in this case. Why is it not in this case? Including, you increase the amount of unfavorable outcomes that are possible, and you're saying that doesn't affect the favorable outcomes. How is that? If I add more numbers to the roulette table, you're going to say that it doesn't decrease the probability?
The environment is constantly changing, and organisms have to continue to evolve to match the environment. So our planet is very dynamic. So if you go back 65 million years, there was way more foliage. Most of the planet was a lot more tropical, from my understanding. There was more trees, there was more oxygen in the environment. So you had organisms that were more well suited to live in that tropical environment. And then when the environment changed, like a giant extinction event, you have a lot of organisms that require lots of air dying off, and those organisms that are smaller tend to survive longer, like smaller mammals, for example, which can survive the extinction event of the dinosaurs. You have lots of times the environment changes, and organisms either have to adapt or they go extinct. Absolutely, and that's the driving mechanism of evolution.
Would you say that? Okay. Would you say that?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
The last thing I was just going to say is that's why we see drastically different organisms. If we go way back in time, huge organisms like dinosaurs needed that oxygen-rich environment to survive.
Well, didn't they need to survive without that, or for like I saw this once, this claim where it was like, why did we develop lungs? Why did an animal develop lungs? A population develop lungs? And you would say because it was a drastically lower oxygen environment, right?
When it comes to lung development, well, maybe I don't understand your question. So,
I'm asking, if you're saying mutations somehow trigger, I'm still not sure if you're saying mutations are triggered by the environment, or mutations happen and they either produce something that's good for to live in that environment, or bad to live in that environment. Are you saying the latter? The latter. Okay.
The latter, for sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I guess I would ask, would you agree that the animals that we see today, they exist because they were selected for? Their traits were selected for?
Yeah, that's reasonable.
Okay. And would you say this because you see them? You see the animals because they exist?
If they're currently surviving, then they're well enough suited for their environment to survive.
Okay, so it sounds like premise one is the animals we see today exist because they adapted and mutated to survive. And when I ask you how you know that, you say because we see them. You see a problem with that?
Well, if they weren't well adapted to their environment, then they wouldn't exist, right? Because they would go extinct.
Well, no,
so
actually.
So a penguin is really well suited for the Antarctic, but if you took a penguin and put it in the Sahara, it would be really ill-suited, so it would die off.
Hold on a second. Didn't you just say the dinosaurs died off?
Yeah, most of the bigger ones did, and then, of course, what we would categorize as a dinosaur, modern birds are the descendants of their dinosaurs.
Hold on. It's just a simple question, is that how did, in your view, dinosaurs die off?
There's multiple different extinction events. A lot of, some of them may be from a meteor that blocks out part of the sun, so that there's a lot of the plant matter dies off, so there's not as much food for the dinosaurs to eat, or the oxygen levels decrease because of the lower plant life. So these bigger organisms can't survive in the less oxygen-rich environment.
Okay. Is it likely that in your time frame of Earth and all of the changes that happen in the environment, many of them harsh, maybe most of them harsh, would you agree that some of the changes in the environment would kill off animals regardless of how well they adapted?
I mean, if you're standing underneath an asteroid when it hits the Earth, yeah, you're going to die no matter what. So certain things are going to destroy any organism.
Okay, like floods, earthquakes, right? So that's why I'm asking if it's possible, because
a flood might not kill everything. So if you can swim really well, you might survive a flood.
I understand, but the most common narrative is that dinosaurs, a whole variation of types of animals under the same umbrella, all died at relatively the same time drastically. And the common theme is that it's a giant meteor that hit, right? Isn't that the common theme?
Yeah.
The reason I brought this up, Jed, is that when I asked you, your short claim about, well, the animals we see today exist because they adapted to survive. And how do we know that? Because they exist. Not only that's circular, but if we can give counterexamples to many types of animals dying in large clusters due to a variety of different natural events, then you really couldn't put all your bets on adaptation being the explanation for the animals we see today, because it could be likely the case based on what we know of natural disasters and your idea of meteors, smashing down on large populations. It's more likely that natural things killed large groups of things rather than they didn't adapt properly.
I feel like I'm not sure I understand the distinction you just made. So if a natural event happens and if it's a really drastic change all of a sudden, organisms that are better suited for that new environment are going to have a better chance at survival. So
not the new environment. No, not the new environment. The environment of complete disaster. I'm saying that there's very few.
That's a new environment.
Yeah, but people say, oh, that's what you meant. I thought you meant after that happens, there's a new utopia.
So during the cataclysm, there is a new environment, which includes, the sky being, blacked out and a lot of plants are dead. So you're going to see organisms like crocodilians thriving because they can survive in harsh environments. They can go long periods of time without eating. They're powerhouses. Crocodiles have been around for a really long time, millions of years, since the dinosaurs, mostly unchanged. Because they're so well suited to a variety of different environments.
Okay, but here's the thing about the environment. Would you agree the environment is also largely composed by other living organisms?
Oh, absolutely. The ecosystem includes every organism that's around you. The organisms, the earth, everything.
Okay, so then that's interesting. It usually doesn't come up in evolution debates. Perhaps I understand why, is that ecology itself is a whole other thing you have to explain from the evolutionary view, right? Because a lot of evolution, you would agree, is focused on specific animals or groups of animals or populations. Maybe it goes back in time to microbiology, all the way back to potentially abiogenesis. But what's left out of the conversation a lot of times is the ecology, the plant life, seeds growing into edible plants, berries, all of this variation of things that kind of taste good or can poison you and so forth. I'm trying to understand from the evolutionary view how you account for the multiplicity and diversity of the ecosystem and its plants and things that can be consumed. Is that accidental that exists alongside animals that need that to exist? Is that evolved at the same time or one before the other?
Yes, plants evolve, and they're continuing to evolve alongside animals. So, like with plants, survivability is a little bit different. So, like with a fruit, for example, a fruit, I'll say this term really loosely, wants to be eaten, even though fruits don't have intentionality. Because when an organism eats the fruit, they ingest the seed, they poop it out. Their poop acts like fertilizer, which allows a new tree to grow. So from no choice of the plant, its survival and reproduction is aided through being consumed. So plants have some plants have a much different method of survival.
I understand. Yeah. There's some animals that seek their own death too. So, but the reason I brought up plants is when you say a plant over time evolved accidentally because it has no intention to be eaten so that it goes through the poop and goes in the ground and it reproduces again, right? It sprouts back up. The question I would have is the same with the populations. How does evolution account for, let's say, a fruit that has a seed? Was there a time a fruit didn't have a seed? Or was there a time where it was just purely seeds and no fruits from the evolutionary view?
That's a great question. So I would say fruits probably evolved after seeds, if I had to guess. Now, one interesting thing is like the tastiness of fruit is that the fruit evolves better taste because it aids in the likelihood that another organism is going to digest it and help propagate more seeds. Another possibility is that animals that eat the fruits, develop taste buds, which make healthier foods seem better tasting. So we really love sugary foods because this sugar is a really, really dense energy source for us, for example. So our taste buds are also the result of evolution. The fruits are the result of evolution. Everything in the natural world is the result of evolution. I also had a couple of questions for you if you wanted to switch over the cross-examination. Do you think the Noah's Ark story is real?
Irrelevant to the topic.
Oh, it's super relevant. So Noah's Ark is if it's true, it's the single most important event in evolutionary history because you have this bottleneck where every single organism was reduced to two individuals, which diversified into a plethora of other organisms afterwards.
Wait a second. You're saying Noah's Ark supports evolution?
Well, microevolution, which most creationists accept, is pivotal to the Noah's Ark story.
I don't even use the term microevolution. Adaptation, things that happen to bacteria, ultimately detrimental to their existence. None of that I accept. I accept that there are animals, and you can study within animals types of adaptation and types of changes within the animals, as we've exhausted with the canines and the carnivorians.
Yeah. So, well, yeah.
So the bringing up Noah's Ark is really just well poisoning. Let's say all of creation. So. No, hold on. What if I granted that all of Christianity is false? How would that change whether or not evolution is true?
It wouldn't. I'm just curious about your understanding. I want to know your understanding about evolution. So you use the term adaptation instead of microevolution. That's fine. It might be a distinction without a difference. But if you do accept the Noah's Ark story is true, then in order to fit all those animals on the boat, let's say instead of fitting 8 different types of bears.
What do you mean all many? Why are you presupposing you know how many animals there are?
There's billions of animals, right?
What do you mean? When?
Right now.
No. How are you're assuming knowledge of what the system was. Like you're just assuming your time frame. That's all you're doing.
Well, I'm using, say, like the Answers in Genesis time frame, where Noah's Ark happened in like 4000 BC, sometime around there.
Oh, you're asking this question. You're asking it. How is it that a small amount of animals that fit on the ark can multiply into a large amount of animals? Is that what you're asking?
Not necessarily the amount of animals, but the diversity of those animals. So, like, if you had, I'm guessing you don't think that we had all 41 different Felidae representatives on the ark: lions, tigers, cheetahs.
Maybe I don't know.
Domestic cats. Well, if we have every single what we would consider and classify as a species, there's not going to be enough room on the ark.
How would that prove evolution? It would actually make it just as bad for evolution. Evolution, if that were true, because correct me if I'm wrong, but evolution also needs some to increase their time here. I mean, every time I look at the time frame for evolution, they push it back more millions of years because they know that the speciation rate, which you guys don't even have an objective speciation rate, has to account for, you need to give more time for, because there's not enough generations. But I don't understand how Noah's Ark would be relevant to your positive claim that evolution happened. You know why? Because in this debate, I'm actually granting
I'm asking about your understanding of evolution.
What's the debate topic, dude?
Evolution.
I don't think it's real.
You don't think it's real?
Obviously, I'm debating that it's not real because the claims about evolution are unanswerable. They're just storybook lessons. You give me chapters of the book. When I ask about the details of the book, you give me another chapter of a different book. I'm simply doing a cross-examination. The evolution posits, right? We'll read it again, has nothing to do with theism, by the way. The process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier ones. The reason I bring this up in the topic of the debate is because if the diversity, I would call that populations, are the observable phenomenon, it's on you tonight, Jed, to tell me and the audience how it is evolution produced populations, and you can't, and you failed to do that tonight. So that's why you want to switch over to theism. I don't care. I could just say I don't know any of the answers of Genesis. It wouldn't change your burden of proof tonight, Jed.
So both of us are putting animals in categories, right? So you're saying these animals belong to a certain kind, and adaptation happens within a kind, but it can't leave the kind. So like you have something like a canine, and wolves, foxes, dogs, and correct me if I'm wrong, wolves, foxes, and dogs all share a common ancestor, and they adapted into different species during the last 6,000 years or so.
Well, they're still in the same, would you call them a family? Like you would still put them in the same family, right? But
sure,
the problem,
I would,
but no, you wouldn't. Why? Because I established very early, and I don't know if you understand that this is actually a defeater to evolution, is that you, Jed, along with all of the other evolutionary proponents, you actually have to, it's an entailment of the view, you have to reject that there's such a thing as a species. You have to.
I've already said that a species is kind of a fuzzy label that we
great. Does speciations happen then? Does speciation
depends
happen?
On how we define the word species.
The way evolution,
reproductive isolation. If two different groups that are descendant from the same parent population, if they become reproductively isolated, that's what I mean when I say the word speciation.
Gotcha. But if you're saying, when I hear speciation, you're talking about two fundamental universal categories that are distinct, right? And one, over time, given lots of time and lots of mutations and lots of unseen phenomenon, something branches off from that and it's no longer that thing, right? It develops into an entirely new thing. For instance, humans, right? I go, what's before a human? You say an ape, right? A chimp or an ape or something like this, right?
No, chimps and humans are cousins of each other. Chimps are not our ancestors.
Just grant me the generality. Got you. Whatever the family is, you're going to go back further, right?
Hominoidea.
Okay, and then that's still a standing, hunched over being, or?
Well, some apes like us walk upright, and a lot of the ones in the fossil record, there's evidence that they walk upright, like Homo erectus and Australopithecus.
Okay, keep going back though. Isn't it the case that if evolution was true, if you go back far enough, these things that are looking like us, you're using similarities to say we're like that, and some genetic stuff to say we're like that. But your own view holds that it keeps changing over time to a point where it's completely dissimilar, right? There's a thing that precedes a human being that's an ancestor from your view of a human being and is completely dissimilar to a human being, right?
I don't know about completely dissimilar. We would look at it and probably say you might call this our ancestor a different kind of thing. If you go back, I don't know, 500 million years and look at what a human ancestor looked like then, you would probably consider it a totally different thing.
Let's just take the most absurd case. You agreed during this debate that a banana is your ancestor.
No, I did not say that. I said I'm related to a banana. Humans and bananas are cousins of each other.
Am I related to a rock?
No, rocks are not alive. So evolution works with biological organisms. So you have to be alive in order to evolve.
Okay. If I'm related to something in the past that still exists today, but I'm related to a banana, is there any fruit that you believe that is our ancestor?
No, I don't think any fruits are our ancestors.
Okay. What is something that you can tell me today is completely the most dissimilar to human beings that is our ancestor?
The most dissimilar to us that is our ancestor? Well, probably Luca, the earliest common ancestor of all living things.
What is it? Is it a shape? What's the shape of Luca?
Nobody knows exactly what it looks like because it existed billions of years ago.
How do you know something existed billions of years ago, but you have no idea what it looked like?
Well, we know that life existed on Earth billions of years ago. So
wait. We know life existed. First of all, that's a different question. But the question is, what's completely dissimilar to human beings that you think is our ancestor? You said Luca. I said, what's that? You said, I don't know.
Yeah. So Luca is the name that scientists have given to the common ancestor of all living things, the earliest common ancestor. But
so that's your God, basically? That's your God, basically.
No, I don't worship Luca. Do you worship your grandpa?
No, it's a God you don't worship.
Do you worship your dad?
No.
Okay, so we don't have to worship our ancestors. Do you worship your great-grandfather?
Can I believe in a God that I don't worship?
Yeah.
Logically? Okay, so
Sure.
what are you talking about? So that's not a good argument. So
if you said because of your ancestor, it's your God.
I didn't say because. I said it's your God because essentially you're creating an arbitrary starting point for something that you have no access to, that you completely that scientists or whoever the hell completely fabricated. Why? Because you needed a start point for all things. Right? In biology, you needed a first start point, right?
So your definition of a God is something that people just make up, and gods are completely made up.
No, from your view. From your view.
No, you're saying that if Luke is my God,
critique.
It's my God because it's made up. So gods are made up.
You know what an internal critique is?
Yes.
What is it?
You're critiquing
your standard.
Model. Yeah.
I'm critiquing your cross-examination of a believer, and you're believing in something that's fully faith, right? That you have no evidence for. And you say, Luca was the first ancestor. And I go, what's that? And you go, I don't know. People said that it existed. And I go, how do you know something existed if you can't tell me what it is? And you said, well, life existed. So therefore I'm going to invent Luca. and not tell you exactly what it is, but tell you also, I'm expected you to be the communicator of science tonight, right? And we're all expected to believe you. And I ask you, who and what is Luca? What is Luca? I don't know.
You think that there's lines in the sand that divide certain kinds of organisms, like a human is a different kind than a dog, for example.
Well, you're using two different terms, so you also believe that.
So, in my perspective, humans and dogs share a common ancestor. You think that all dogs share a common ancestor, right? All dogs converge from wolves. And I'm not sure if I got a clear answer before. You think that foxes, wolves, dogs, African painted dogs, dingoes, they all share a common ancestor. Is that true?
Yeah, I would grant that they're in a type of a family of similar
animals. They're all in the same family. They're related. They have a common ancestor. So we both agree.
Yeah, but what family doesn't come from a previous family of its kind?
Everything comes from something previous.
No. I didn't ask whether it's something previous. I already know that. That's why I asked the question. Tell me one organism that doesn't come from a version of itself.
So it sounds like you're going back to the law of monophily, which is
Can you just answer the question?
An organism, say it one more time.
Give me an example of a kind. I'm a human, right? You could use anything that comes from something that's not it. That's not a version of it.
How about if we go back to whales? So a modern whale, would you say is different than a Durodon? Do you know what a Durodon is?
That's begging the question. That's what's in question, right? I go, give me an example of something that didn't come biologically from its kind. And you go, let me presuppose the thing in question by saying there was a land whale and the land whale became a not land whale. And then maybe some not land whales.
And I'm giving you an example.
No.
You asked for an example of something that came from something that looks drastically different from my understanding. That's what you want to know. A different kind of animal. You would probably say that a Pachycetus is a different kind than a whale, right?
Is it a kind of whale?
Pachycetus is an aerodactyl, and whales developed from aerodactyls.
Is it a type of whale?
A Pachycetus is not a type of whale.
Okay, so a
non-whale is a aerodactyl.
Okay, so you're using arbitrary. You admitted during the debate you use arbitrary taxonomy to draw out similar things. And the question is whether or not you think things are similar. The question is, can you demonstrate a type of animal that you can observe, that you can demonstrate comes from a not that animal? And you go, yeah, the thing that I'm asserting, which is the thing I can't demonstrate, which is there's a thing that precedes a whale that's whale-like that must have been the thing that produced this whale. Well, you're saying they're two different things, right? The question
That's what you asked for. You asked for an example of something that precedes something else that looks like a different thing.
How
so
did
I'm telling you, Pachycetus. Yeah, so I went over this a bit in my opening statement, where if we look from modern whales, we go back in time to, say, Durodon, Protocetus, Ambulocetus, Pachycetus, Indohyus. It's a long list. There's 15 different species I have here written down that represent a slow and gradual change from land-dwelling animals to modern whales. Now, the question becomes, are each of these organisms its own separate kind, or are they related in some way? And my evidence that they're related is that they all exist in rock strata, like different rock strata moving backward in time. And as we move backward in time, we have very similar looking fossil structures with gradual change over time. The blowhole gets further and further up the body. The hands, the arm bones get smaller. The hands get bigger, almost like they're mimicking flippers. The leg bones shrink smaller and smaller. The tail gets bigger and more wide. So we have all these gradual changes, which represent slow and steady change over multiple generations.
And you said before with dogs is that the phenomenon of different phenotypes, even absent, there are animals absent similar genotypes that have similar phenotypes. You're just looking at phenotype, right?
With the case of fossils, that's fossils and rock strata is the only thing we can look at.
The answer to the question is yes, I'm only looking at phenotype.
And rock strata. Where we find the fossils is extremely important too.
Hold on a second. Is it possible for different animals of differing phenotype to share similar genotype?
Yeah, we call that,
hold on. Can that exist with whales?
Yeah, so whales look a lot
So you don't
like
know then.
for example. So whales and fish share tons of characteristics. They both swim in the water. They both,
You don't understand
to
what
an
just happened.
untrained eye, might look pretty similar. But
You don't understand what just happened, Jed.
Upon
Jed,
further investigation, you're asking if two different organisms, which aren't closely related, could share characteristics that arrived separately.
And what determines under the evolutionary view what things look like is random mutation that exists over time that produces some sort of phenomenon that allows them to function in the environment. Well, the problem with your argument here is that you can have a variety of different animals in differing families that share similarities in their phenotype. Why? Because you're looking at the function of the phenotype. So it's similar because the functions are similar, but it's not logical because I just demonstrated, isn't it possible for two things to look very similar phenotypically and be completely dissimilar genetically?
Sure.
Well, if that's the case, then all you're doing is assuming that there's this different thing that morphed over time into this new thing, when really you don't actually know. The truth of the matter is it's a fact that things that have similar phenotype might have different genotype. Things that with similar phenotype might have the same genotype. But the problem with your view is that it's demonstrably the case that something could look like another thing and they share function. And because their function, flying wings or doing whatever their tasks are, their phenotype will look similar. That doesn't follow that they come genetically from each other, right?
Yeah, you're right. So in the case of whales, we have whales and fish, which both share a lot of phenotypes. They both swim, they have flippers, they have wide tails. They look pretty similar to, a lay person. So someone who's not really trained in biology might look at a fish and a whale, or a whale shark and a whale, and say, these are probably really closely related. But in reality, a whale's closest living relative is the hippo, which is also an ariodactyl. Now, when we look deeper than surface level, we see characteristics that are shared amongst those two. So whales have hand bones and arm structures that are similar to all mammals.
Okay.
They have fur, they give breast milk, they give birth to live young, just like modern mammals, which tells us that whales are more closely related to mammals than they are to fish, because when we look deeper than just the surface level, we see shared characteristics amongst them and mammals.
Okay, cool. Let's talk about this process because I'm fascinated by this specifically. I've seen this animation so many times. You're saying a group of whales that weren't whales yet, they were kind of land cows, right? A land cow.
I don't know if I call it a cow. Let's say
like a land. Okay, a cocky fetus. So it's on the land.
Hey,
it's
that's
surviving.
on the bad word list. You can't say that.
It's on the land and it's doing quite fine, right? You've granted yourself the population of these things, right? They're there on the island, right?
Sure, we know Pachycetus existed because we have the fossils for them.
I got you. I understand. So there's this animal that existed and in populations, they're multicellular, they're two sex, right? And they produce, right? So you're saying that animal made its way somehow, a version of that thing made its way into the ocean, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you tell me the process of that, please?
Sure. Yeah. So if we go back to like Pachycetus and some of the animals that lived alongside it, they were probably largely fish predators. So they're hunting fish in shallow waters. And so the animals, the organisms that are better at hunting fish, the ones that are faster in water, the ones that have slightly longer tails, which can compulse them farther, tend to survive more because they eat more fish, they have more babies, they pass their genes on to the next generation. The organisms that have smaller legs tend to survive more because now, in this semi-aquatic environment, the legs are actually becoming a hindrance. And so the smaller your legs, the better you can swim in water because you don't need legs in water. So eventually, we get to a modern whale who has leg bones, but they're so small and internal that we can't even see them.
Bro. Okay, so what I heard in all of that is there was an animal that was on land, and you just described the advantage of being in the water, and I'm asking, what's the process of getting into the water? Is it how many generations does it take to get in from the kiddie pool section of the water to the deep ocean, according to evolution?
Pachycetus lived about 48 million years ago.
That didn't answer the question. So if it's like the transition between the Pachycetus doing what it wants to on land, it's totally figured out life. It figured out how to reproduce, defend itself, find the right bushes to eat, what not to eat, poops, all of that. It starts to walk into the what? like the 6-inch water, 1 foot
Sure,
water.
yeah,
Now,
shallow
for a
water.
million, how many millions of years is that
Starts
part?
to hunt for fish in shallow water. So you're
Yeah.
aware that bears hunt fish, right? So
Are bears on
can
their way
walk
to
on-
being whales? Bear whales? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe when some
Yeah,
polar
maybe.
ice caps
Yeah, why
melt,
not?
maybe
Why
bears are
not?
gonna have to start getting
Yeah.
better at swimming.
Yeah, why not? So I stick to the land whale here. So land whale, shout out to land whale, by the way.
Pachycetus.
So Pachycetus walks into the little water, knowing that millions of years before has produced a population that is totally surviving and thriving on land, and against its own nature up to this point, starts frolicking in the water with its little elephant feet? What do you think it looks like?
I wouldn't call it against its nature. Lots of animals hunt for food in the water.
Okay, no,
Lots of animals hunt
okay.
fish.
I'm granting you that it's doing a little bit of fishing in the 2 feet water, right?
Okay, sure.
Okay, so then what you're saying is that even though it's completely designated to land, accidentally, by the way, because this still has to be some sort of genetic mutation that's causing the thought, if you want to grant the animal a thought, to go further into the water, which it never has before. So it's testing its boundaries, right? The problem with your view is that you have to make this insane story between 10 feet of water and finally just being in the water. Now you're acting like there's a bunch of these weird elephant cows that are diving down into water and hunting like they're spearfishing, right? And then they come back to their home to eat their fish, right? And then what's worse is they have to develop this intense, stressful ability to hold their breath, even though that's not built into their previous structures at all. So you have these combinations of things that need to happen between being on land and becoming a whale that you cannot possibly, with a million words, explain in a way that doesn't sound like a children's book.
We have about 10 more minutes and then we'll wrap up, gentlemen.
Sure. Yeah, so I don't think it's that extreme of a suggestion to say that animals can hunt fish in the water, and they might also be well suited to eat other animals on land. We see that all the time with bears, for example. They eat fish. Yeah, so if a Pachycetus wanders into the water and says, "Oh, look at all these fish. I'm going to start hunting fish because they're easy to catch and eat." The Pachycetus that are better at hunting fish tend to survive more because they can capture more food, they survive longer, they have more offspring, so they reproduce into the next generation. And the random mutations that are better at swimming, the better swimmers tend to survive better in that new environment.
Dude, what makes them go into the deeper parts of the water, right? What are you saying? There has to be this threshold, by the way, which the land whales,
the desire to catch fish. That's their motivation. The desire
to catch fish. Right. Yeah. So why would there be a desire to catch fish? You know what also want to catch fish? Cats. You ever notice that cats want to look at fish and they want to catch the fish?
Yeah, some cats are great swimmers, like black panthers, for example.
Yeah, and do you see a cat whale anywhere?
Maybe someday, maybe in 50 million years.
Yeah, but not without an explanation, right?
Well, the explanation is that we've been over this a couple of times. The black panthers that are better suited at swimming are going to pass on those genes to the next generation.
You're
Lots of
basically
animals
saying,
can swim and walk on land at the same time.
No, you're saying that desire somehow influences random mutation. That's what you're saying.
Survivability influences random mutation, and then most organisms have a desire to survive because the desire to survive is ingrained within us because of evolution. If you didn't desire survival, then you wouldn't survive. That's why every organism alive today likes, for the most part, likes surviving and likes reproducing.
How did you tell me how the Pachycetus land whale developed a defense system against larger predators in the ocean?
Maybe it went into the water to avoid predators. Maybe it was hiding from predators that were on land.
Bro. Is that what I asked? What is this? Don't answer the question.
You're asking me to speculate about a Pachycetus avoiding predators in the ocean.
Look,
any predator in the ocean. Hang on, any predator in the ocean big enough to eat a Pachycetus could not get into shallow water. So if the Pachycetus is in shallow water, it's going to avoid
sharks. Aren't sharks the oldest?
The oldest what?
One of the oldest from the evolutionary view. One of the oldest animals.
No, I wouldn't call sharks one of the oldest animals.
Are they older than Pachycetus?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, cool. So do they actually habitually hunt in shallow waters if needed? Do you think
Well,
do you think a shark would probably want a nice bite of a land whale's ass?
Maybe, yeah.
Probably.
And predation is all over the environment. So hang on. Pachycetus, who are better swimmers, are going to be better suited at avoiding predators like sharks.
I didn't ask that.
A swimmer. You're asking,
dude. What's a seal?
You're asking about whether a Pachycetus.
Bro, hold on.
You're asking whether a Pachycetus could avoid a predator, and I'm saying.
You ever see a seal? Have you ever seen a seal?
I've seen a seal before. Yeah.
Do you ever seen a seal successfully or not successfully dodge a shark or orcas?
Sure, yeah.
Do you think that a Pachycetus, in the time frame it needs to be in the water, can develop seal-like defense in time for enough time to reproduce? By the way, does their sex change in the water? What do they just do? Water sex now? They find each other underwater? What is wrong with you?
Humans can have sex in the water. Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
It doesn't follow we can
Why couldn't
live
a
underwater.
Pachycetus have sex underwater?
No, that means that they give birth underwater too after giving birth on land.
Humans can do that too.
Not underwater.
Have you ever heard of a
they
tub
need
birth?
oxygen. Dude, you need oxygen. You need to get out of the water. It's a tub, dude.
Yeah, modern whales still breathe oxygen.
Hey, do I find did I find my wife underwater? What is she, a mermaid?
Humans can give birth underwater. Humans breathe air.
I didn't say
whales give birth underwater. Whales breathe air. I don't understand what your objection is.
I didn't make the argument that I could give birth. Someone could give birth skydiving.
You can give birth?
No. Well, you believe that. You're progressive, right? So the point is that you go from land animal sexual selection all sorted out after millions of years. Then you posit land whales tip their toe and hunt fish, but then gradually go into the water. But the problem is there has to be a threshold at which they go underwater, and now they're hunting, their defense, and their sexual mating happens completely underwater immediately.
Not immediately. It doesn't have to be immediate.
Then what? Tell me how that looks then.
So an organism like humans could have sex in water or outside of water. Humans can give birth outside of water or inside of water.
I don't find my mate in water.
You could. What if you go to a swimming pool and you meet a nice girl? I don't know if you're into girls, maybe you're into guys, but that's fine. No judgment from me whatsoever.
That's not analogous. That's not analogous. Why? Because
you just said, why can't I find a wife in the water? And I'm saying you
underwater.
And
underwater, the ocean, not a pool.
Yeah, so a Pachycetus is, as Pachycetus evolve, they spend more and more time in the water. They see a fish swimming down. They say, "Oh, if I hold my breath, I have a better chance at getting the fish." So the organisms, the land whales that are better at holding their breath, have a better chance at catching prey. So over time, we see whales develop a better and better ability to hold their breath. Humans can hold their breath, so this is a characteristic of most mammals.
Okay.
Many mammals are adapt at swimming, so we can most mammals can swim. It's just a matter of how good we are at swimming, how long we can hold our breath. Whales are extremely well suited to life underwater. They can hold their breath for a long period of time.
Yeah, I understand. But the question wasn't whether or not I can do intercourse underwater or outside of water. The question is the transition, in your view. You're telling this story about how there's this land animal that gradually becomes not a land animal. And because of that, what's necessary, I'm positing what's necessary under your view. What's necessary under the view is there's a transition that's made that's long and arduous between sex and procreation and finding your mate outside on the land, and then you move toward in the water, right? So the problem I'm posing is not just a logistical problem of time, but it's this other problem of where is this transition made between a land animal going from fully land to partially water to fully water, and how do you account for the necessary changes in their biology that need to happen during that, being that you need to then swim up, get air, hold your breath, go back down, find a mate, fight off another land whale in the process, underwater fighting, right? And then you have to have sex with the female somehow also while perpetually swimming, right? You just grant yourself this massive jump between chapter 1 and chapter 9034 and say, well, it happened.
Yeah, the ability to find a mate and have sex underwater is not so. The ability to have sex outside of the water is not lost as soon as the ability to have sex inside the water is gained.
I
Do you
agree.
understand that?
I agree.
Okay, sure. So, there's a chance some pachycetuses were having sex and finding mates in shallow water. Some of them were doing it on land. And so as their diet and their environment became more and more water-based, they started spending more and more of their time in the water. So you're acting like, oh, I got to hold my breath and I got to swim as low as I can to find a mate.
No.
If you're mating with another one of your own species, another pachycetus, they're probably also going to be up by the surface where you are. And a lot of animals are social. So you're not going to have that hard of a time finding other pachycetuses.
Yeah, you're staying in the beach area, and that makes sense in the beach area, but that's not what you're positing. What I'm saying is that you're eventually going to have to leave the safety of getting back to land and doing your land thing, given that's 50 million years of that happened for this animal, for it to become itself, and now it's moving into the water. The problem with your view is that in the movement toward the water, you have to use evolution, you have to use random mutation to account for the necessary changes underwater. Once they finally take the turn way underwater, right? Now they have to defend themselves underwater. But guess what? That has to be random under your view. They had to have randomly done it, right? They randomly developed defensive skills, right?
Defensive skills like from predators, like swimming faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, the mutations that elicit those traits are random, but then the selection pressure is not random. So if you're a really fast swimmer, you're going to be better able to avoid a predator so that you're more likely to be able to pass your genes on to the next generation. If you're a slower swimmer, then that predator is going to eat you up. So you're not going to pass on your genes to the next generation. So as we go through time, the better and better swimmers tend to survive and pass on more and more of their offspring.
Okay, so in a group of animals, would you agree that if we look at a group of animals right now, you could look at a group of animals and the universality of the animal, right? We could rate their swimming abilities, right?
Yeah, we can try. Sure.
Okay. Are you making the case that the kinds of animals, let's say I granted you halfway in the water with the pachycetus, once they start swimming for real, what you're doing is that you're saying over millions of years, some of the particular pachycetus developed the ability to swim really fast, and another portion of them never learned, right? They died off.
Some Aerodactyls, if we go back just prior to Pachycetus, we find Indohyus. That's an ancestor, to the best of my knowledge, of hippopotamus. So yeah, and hippopotamus are also semi-aquatic. So yeah, different organisms split into different daughter groups, and then over time, those daughter groups diversify more and more.
I think the hippo is a really good example. Okay, I think the hippo is a good example because if I asked you, how would you know from the evolutionary view that a hippopotamus was making its way into the full life, the full aquatic life? How would you know that it's on their way to doing that? Because if you guys can predict an animal you see today, now I understand we're not going to be around that long, right? You need deep, nebulous time that's incomprehensible and gradual. I understand. But even if I granted you the deep time in the future, I'm asking you from a predictive element of evolution. How would you know hippopotamuses are on the verge of becoming fully aquatic like the land whale?
I don't think we can make a prediction quite like that, especially considering our environment is constantly changing. Plus, hippopotamus seem to be really well adapted to their specific niche. So they're really good at being semi-aquatic. So
okay, great.
Is there any selection pressure to make them more aquatic? If there was a huge flood, maybe, but I'm not sure that we see that.
Do you agree that you're positing a theory that you couldn't possibly predict in the future to happen?
Now, if we make an experiment, we can through engineering of humans, create a new environment for an organism. Like, for example, if we take a population of organisms and put them in a laboratory setting and change their environment in some way, we can make predictions about how they'll adapt. For example, you take something like antibiotics. So if you take antibiotics, if you only take 9 of your pills instead of 10, some of those bacteria are going to survive, we predict, that the ones that survive are going to be more resilient to the bacteria, which is why you always need to finish your antibiotics, because then those bacteria become better adapted at avoiding antibiotics, because you're basically selectively breeding more and more robust bacteria.
I know, but that's not.
So
that's
we
not
can
the
predict
example.
some things in evolution.
I don't know. I didn't ask if you can predict some things. I asked whether or not, if the theory is one animal is a universally itself on land, and over time you posit that through time its genetics change a little bit at a time, it adapts a little bit at a time, and it splinters off different families of itself, eventually leading to what you call like a whale today. If that's what you're telling the story to me in the audience, and I simply ask, is there a way you could predict that with the current animal? And the answer is no. I'm not sure why I should believe your story, other than you interpolating different things you found that have similar phenotype and just drawing the story on top of the bone and being like, well, things look similar and there's old things that look similar. Therefore, the land whale became a sea whale. Well, I don't think that's the case, and I don't think that's worth believing. Why? Because I've demonstrated tonight that things that look similar could just as very well be similar things that existed at different times, and one died off and one didn't. For instance, that's the truth of the matter, dude. Like if I have a camel, like I always use this camel world analogy. If I have if I know what a camel is, and I dig up, right, with my friends, we dig up and we're so excited. We found this weird new thing that looks like a camel. It's a little smaller, looks similar, not the exact, but it looks similar, right? And we say, dude, I love evolution. We just found what could be the ancestor of this camel we know. Let's name it. But let's posit that across the world, at the basin of a Peruvian mountain, there's a family that finds the same exact type of animal, right? But they're not celebrating. Why? Well, in this case, they already know what it is. It's just a different type of animal that looks kind of like a camel. What I'm asking you, from the evolutionary view that you're defending, how do you determine whether or not what you found is an ancestor, or did you just find something that died off that looked kind of like the thing that you're saying was its descendant? How do you determine the difference?
Yeah. So what your question is really getting at is that,
say after Jed answers that, Jim Bob, we're going to move to closing statements. So then you'll be able to close, and then back to Jed. Okay.
Okay.
Sure. What your question is really getting at is, given limited and incomplete information, could scientists draw false conclusions? And yeah, the answer is absolutely yes, they could. And that happens all the time. Well, yeah, you did. You said
no. I said, what's the methodology?
Looks like, you said if people found what looks like a camel ancestor and they conclude that this is a camel ancestor, but it's actually just a llama or something else that lives somewhere else in the world, if they've never seen a llama, would they mistakenly think that's an ancestor? The question is, quite possibly. Given incomplete information, scientists could draw false conclusions, and that happens all the time. Scientists used to think that hippos and elephants were really closely related in the pachyderm family, but
that's not what
after
I asked,
further
though.
investigation, we found that that's not the case.
But that's not what I asked, Jed. Again, what I asked is, I know they could be wrong. That's why I asked the question. The question is, what's the methodology to determine which is right and which is wrong? That's what the question is. If you find something similar, you heard the hypothetical, you understand the hypothetical. One person finds it, knows what it is. It's just another animal that they know of. But across the world, a group of people don't know what they just found, and they think it's an ancestor. Without knowing the other thing actually exists already across the world, I'm asking you, what's the methodology the people are using to determine whether or not they did find an ancestor that's dead, or they just found another animal that's similar that just happened to die off that could have just as well lived alongside of the camel? What's the method?
Sure. In your particular example, there may not be enough information to sufficiently determine whether this organism is an ancestor or not. Maybe it's a branch from the ancestry that's not directly in the same lineage as camels. We can only determine that if we find more information. So if we find more fossils, more evidence, more organisms living in the present, we can draw and make a more accurate representation of the evolutionary tree. So genetics plays a really big role in evolution as well. So if we compare the genes of multiple species living today, we can determine how closely related they are to each other. And that's how we know that llamas and camels are both closely related in the family Camelidae.
Yeah, we're not
So-
talking about, we're talking about this specific example. The reason I use this is it's purely phenotypical. So I'm saying if you're relying, anywhere you're relying on purely phenotypical similarities, I'm asking you, how are you determining and drawing out this storyline? One came from the other. If you just admitted that it's all just an assumption and you'd need more information, including genetic information, to actually make the determination, but you're willing right here and now to tell the entire audience through a really insane story, by the way, hearing it back, is that the land whale, I like to call it the land whale, made its way into the ocean fully and made its full descent into the ocean over millions of years. Why do you think this? Because there's similar phenotypes between bones you found. I mean, that's an insane assumption to me.
Jim Bob, would you like to move into your closing statement, please?
Yes. Well, the closing statement is this. Tonight, I demonstrated, like all the other evolution debates I've had, that evolution can never be brought through the scientific method, through a very simple observation to a hypothesis. What we get instead is we observe fossils and then try to make predictions about other things we find. And when we find those, we call that an experiment. Well, I'm sorry, that's pseudoscience. That's not an experiment. An experiment is you have an observation in nature. You ask a question of what's causing the observation. So you introduce something that's causing it. In this case, the observation is changes in the diversity of life in populations in animals. The assumption from my opponent is that evolution caused, that means a mechanism produced through random mutation, sexual selection, produced what we see today as populations, differing populations of animals, right? I go, great. I was going to ask him, how do you introduce the thing that you say is causing the multiplicity of populations? Well, you saw where that line went. So once that was through, we couldn't get to a scientific theory from the scientific method. We moved over to other things, like more precise things. And for the audience listening who's undecided or partial to anti-evolution, I highly recommend, when you're in an argument or in a conversation in this topic, with this topic, go granular. When you bring in things like the liver and you ask the proponent to extrapolate out the process, the random process of developing high precision specialties inside the body, they scramble. They don't know what to do. Why? Because it's hardly ever asked. What's asked about is, did we come from a chimp or not? Look at the fossils of the things. It looks like us. You get this stuff. You get stories. When you get into high resolution questions about biology, it's over. Why? Because it's an absurd statement on its face. Random, unlikely mutations that you didn't observe produce over time functional building blocks toward a high precision, high specialty or mechanism, like a brain, like a heart, like a liver, right? It's in a direction toward function, complex function, right? There's nothing today I heard from my opponent. I do appreciate he did keep his composure. I really appreciate that, Jed. What I got from my opponent is simply a story, a general story that it happened. What did I say in my opener? He would appeal to gradual, deep time, right? An incomprehensible level of gradualism that we can't possibly ponder or observe, but just trust me, bro, it happened because look at these animals we see today. Well, I reject that. Now, I did predict, I didn't put it in my opener, that my opponent would try to bring in a red herring or something that was completely absent the title tonight, outside of the bounds, which is theism. That's a different debate I'm willing to have with my opponent. You could be an atheist, Jed, and completely tear apart evolution and their assumptions. I've seen it. It's not popularized. I wish it was, but there are atheists who tear apart evolution using very similar tactics that I do. They're not religious. They don't believe in Noah's Ark. They don't believe in any of the miracles of the Bible. They don't need to. It's not necessary to unravel the flimsy, rotting fabric that is evolution. Aside from that, there are even more deeper philosophical entailments of evolution that would basically, I'll put it shortly, if evolution was true, Jed's own thinking would be a cause product of just mere chemicals, right? That's the other route I would take if it was strictly philosophical. But anyway, evolution is false. Nobody can defend it. All you can do is tell a fascinating story that requires lots of time with things you can't observe. You have to take a look at what's true of parts, and you have to extrapolate and say it's true of the whole. That's called a composition fallacy. The entirety of the evolutionary paradigm is a combination of an extrapolation fallacy and a composition fallacy. And with that, I appreciate the time. Thanks for the moderation. Thanks in the chat. Super chat if you want to support. And Jed, I appreciate you coming on and debating. Okay.
Thank you, Jim Bob. And Jed, to you, sir.
Perfect. Yeah. Once again, thank you, Sarah, for hosting. Thanks, Jim Bob, for the conversation. And I also appreciate you keeping your composure and remaining civil. That goes a long way. So thank you for that. And I would love to have a debate sometime about theology specifically, if you're ever open to that. Now, Jim Bob accused me of a methodology where I'm categorizing animals and saying that they're related based on phenotype alone, where Jim Bob uses the exact same methodology to determine that organisms are related, phenotype. So he looks around at all the different dogs, wolves, foxes, dingoes, African painted dogs, and he says these are all part of the dog kind. They're all a universal category of animal based on phenotype. So we're both categorizing animals based on phenotype, but it's wrong when I do it, but it's okay when he does it. Jim Bob asked about hyper-specific instances of evolution, like with the liver, and how these organs can arise. And when his opponent doesn't know the answer, he claims victory. But yeah, I'm not an evolutionary biologist. I don't study liver evolution, so I can't possibly give you the exact gene which helped the evolution along of the liver. I can't do that. Sorry. But I can stick to more grandiose topics regarding evolution when it comes to something really hyper-specific. Anywhere inside of the animal kingdom, there's a good chance that I may not know the answer. He refused to answer whether he believes Noah's Ark is real. And I will assert again that Noah's Ark, and whether it's real or not, is absolutely the most important event in history. It doesn't, I'm not saying it's real as to prop up my own claim about evolution. If Noah's Ark happened, then evolution has to be real, but not only evolution, super fast, rapid evolution from one pair of proto-dogs into the 37 different species of canidae that we have today. One pair of cats evolving into the 41 species of felidae that we have today. And if you claim that all of those organisms, all billions of organisms we currently have here on Earth, were on the Ark, then there's just not enough space to fit everything. So you have to reduce it down to these proto-kinds. But a kind is incredibly ill-defined. I never really got a clear answer on what a kind is. There's kinds within kinds. Cats are part of domestic cats are a kind, but they're also part of the felidae kind. So I'm not sure where the boundary line is that prevents a certain organism from evolving too much. He never mentioned any specific observation which contradicts evolution, not that I'm aware of. He just pointed to instances where he claims evolution was just adaptation or it was just epigenetics, but he can't ever point to something that contradicts the theory of evolution. Apart from organisms can't have sex underwater, so therefore Pachycetus is not the ancestor of whales. We do know the mechanism of evolution. It's random mutation through natural selection. So the random mutation part, that's random. Natural selection is how the environment selects for specific traits. So when the environment changes, the selection pressures change, and then the organisms have to adapt and evolve accordingly. And we know for a fact that not every organism in a population has the same genes as everything else, with the example of eye color or hair color in humans. We have observed in a lab single-cell organisms becoming multi-cell organisms. This isn't something we got to in the debate, but there's some studies we can point to showcasing snowflake yeast evolving from single-cell to multi-cell. I wonder if horses and donkeys are part of the same kind of animal. They're both equines, but they can't produce fertile offspring because they have different number of chromosomes. So was there a donkey and horse ancestor on Noah's Ark, or was there only just one? I also bring up Noah's Ark because it to me, it helps demonstrate whether where the kinds lie. What is a kind exactly? Because Noah's Ark had the minimum number of animals possible, which were all representative of a specific kind. If dinosaurs and humans coexisted, which I believe my opponent believes, then we would expect to find T-Rex alongside human fossils within the same rock layer, but we never find that. So the only conclusion, the only reasonable conclusion we can come based on that is that dinosaurs existed at a time where there were no humans, or at least there's no evidence that humans coexisted with dinosaurs. But if they did, we would expect to find exuberant amounts of evidence. And through logic alone, we can see that small changes do accumulate over time, and is the case with evolution. We're never going to see a crocodile give birth to a duck. We never see any sort of huge change in a really small period of time. And unfortunately, since humans only live for about 80 years, all the big changes we see are going to be in small organisms that reproduce really quickly, like bacteria, E. coli, yeast, fleas, these things that have really short lifetimes that we can observe in a laboratory. But of course, the E. coli never becomes something that's not E. coli because of the law of monophyly. So that's a tenet of evolution, of course. And that's about all I've got. Thanks again so much for the debate, and I look forward to answering some questions.
Thank you so kindly to both of you. I'm actually very impressed. This was the most productive and non-combative debate I think I've ever seen, and I say that with a very big volume to it because Jim Bob is one of the people here, and that to me that means a lot.
Now, if I can interject, Jim Bob, I thought you were as polite as you exceeded my expectations with how polite you were. And actually, more than one person warned me about you in preparation for the debate. Even before we set the debate up, I got a message from somebody on Instagram saying, "Hey, I saw Jim Bob challenge you to a debate. I just want to warn you." And then he went on and on about you. But thank you for conducting yourself civilly. I really appreciate it. You seem like a decent guy to me.
Yeah, from that, I just matched the opponent. You're civil, you're orderly, you're well behaved. So it's like, why would I be a dick to someone who's not a dick?
Yeah.
We're working on Jim Bob. His evolution status is still going. Jeff Klein coming in with the Big 10 says, if God real, doe, why evolution real, doe? And gentlemen, you are both more than welcome to respond to any of these or not respond. It's totally
well. That's rhetorical. I did want to just respond really quickly to your last thing. You said the I don't know if it was the donkey you referred to that can't reproduce with a previous of its kind, or like a liger or like things like that, right?
Yeah, a donkey and a horse can't produce viable offspring, meaning the mules that they produce can't reproduce themselves.
So they're not in the same category, right? That's what you're saying. They're not in the same group or species.
I was speculating that you would put them in the same category of equines.
But like a larger category. Yeah. That's what I was wondering, because I was thinking, like, are there humans that are close to, like, let's say Down syndrome people? It's capable, but it's rare, especially with each other, that they could reproduce. If it happened to be the case, Jed, that there was some sort of, under your view, a mutation that occurred, which solidified the fact it became fact that Down syndrome people couldn't reproduce. Would they no longer? You would still categorize them as human, but not what? Like, would it change their category, being that they're similar to the donkey in this case? Or would you change taxonomy? Would you say they're not really a human, or?
Well, no. So in the case of a mule, its parents belong to two reproductively isolated species, which is why we don't call it either a donkey or a horse. It's its own separate thing. In the case with someone with a genetic disorder like Down syndrome, both of their parents are humans. They're a human. So evolution exclusively happens at the population level slowly. You're never going to have a parent who gives birth to something that's not what it was.
Okay, so you don't hold the view that eventually over time, what we call human now, through a number of genetic mutations, could splinter off and become something not human? It would always be human, but would just devolve or change, or like, is that what you're saying from your view?
I think that, well, it's always going to be a human. So a human's never going to produce a non-human. But humans, it's possible that in a million years, if we're still around, we could look drastically different. One possible mechanism of this is cesarean sections, where humans with humans with larger heads can fit out, or women can give birth to children with bigger heads, bigger brains, because we no longer have to rely on traditional methods of birth. We could do this thing, the C-section, that no other animal is capable of doing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but with regards to the question, if God real doe, why evolution real doe? My understanding is that under the creationist model, if God is real, then microevolution within a kind happens, but it can't happen outside of a kind. But there's many Christians who believe in God and accept evolution. I know you had a debate, Jim Bob, about whether Christianity contradicts the theory of evolution, or if Christianity and evolution could be compatible with each other. You were on the side that they can't be. So I'd be curious to hear just a brief synopsis
I could do
of your
that
thoughts
quick.
on that.
Yeah, I could do that really quick, Sarah. It's similar to the argument I brought up. Now, evolution results in nominalism. In other words, what we call human, if evolution were true, would be kind of in flux. Like you said, it could suddenly be the case where we're totally a different shape. Maybe you'd still call it human, but you'd have to put on the hat of the Christian for a second, Jed, and say, well, if the Christian view is that we're made in the image of God, and part of being made in the image of God is duties and mind, body, soul. Our bodies, from a Christian view, are also made with intent to carry out tasks and function compatible, aligned with Christian duties, right? So what I bring up rhetorically with my debater is, well, there's two problems. One is, if Christ assumed human nature, which we believe under our theology, but the human nature is always in flux, Christ couldn't take on a universal nature. Like you agreed that a species is a fuzzy thing. It's not really set. It's kind of like fuzzy. Well, if humanity is fuzzy and not a universal, but a whole collection of just particulars, then Christ would only take on a very particular creature's nature, his own, and that's it. That's a problem with soteriology and healing and theosis. The other problem is, it could be the case that humans could evolve to something that looks like some sort of hunched over beast without opposing thumbs, maybe, like for whatever reason. It's possible. It could be, like, just posit like some change, any change that would no longer allow us to be able to carry out a divine liturgy. The Christian proponent of evolution would have to say, yeah, it would just be like a group of beasts, still praying and sort of like moaning, like singing, but they're not saying anything. They're just kind of like grunting. Like that's what it would reduce to under a Christian view.
All right. I was laughing at my chat. They almost just took a big L. The chat almost took a really large L. Teguch says, let's go, not one step back. Also follows up saying, when we hit the goal, do we get Jim Bob yelling goal mid-debate? That would be hilarious. Did you guys hit your goal on your end? Do you get to yell it?
No, we're at 33 of 50, guys. There's a lot that needs to happen.
Unacceptable. Well, hopefully Clicker helped with that over there with the big 200 on Jim
is that
Bob's
you?
side.
Oh,
That's
thank you,
sir.
Oh, I didn't know it was you or me. Thank you, Clicker. I didn't know. I hold my tongue now because one time I celebrated, and then I had to do a smaller celebration when I learned it was for someone else. Thank you, Clicker. W is in the chat for Clicker. Thank you so much.
Would you like the honor of reading this one, Jim
Yes.
Bob?
Clicker says for $200, thank you so much, Clicker. I've seen this tactic before. Let me make the same mistake. Observation is not an experiment. There is no dependent or independent variable control, etc. Is there some other standard other than the scientific method that scientists rely on to qualify something as a scientific theory? I've been asking that, Clicker, all the time. Put this in a clear question for you, Jed, if you want to answer it, is what is the arbiter for two competing hypotheses in science, if not an experiment?
Observations can be evidence towards a theory. So a theory is the best explanation, the best working model that supports all of the best available evidence and is contradicted by none of it. So if we have two competing theories, like say evolution and creationism, which I know you're not necessarily defending today, you're just on the negative of evolution. If those are our two competing hypotheses, which one best represents the available evidence?
Yeah,
And
I would
the
say,
one that
I would just say that, first of all, those are like, I would say you can't put creationism in the same category as science. We're talking about two scientific theories, right? So we wouldn't say, like, it's a mistake for a Christian to posit creation as a scientific theory. So let's take two scientific theories. Let's put a creationism aside and say there's two scientific theories. Clicker here didn't say whether or not an observation could be evidence. He said it can't be an experiment. You can't just look at an observation and say that's the experiment. But you did say that in your example, because you said you dug up something, and what you found, you called digging something up an experiment. I agree with Clicker here, not just because he's very generous, but the thing you did when digging something up, you just added an observation. You said, oh, look, another observation. An experiment is when you introduce something to manipulate whether or not the thing you're introducing is actually causing the phenomenon. In this case, the phenomenon is the variation in species. Certainly digging up the fossil isn't a mechanism that doesn't show you the mechanism that caused the diversity of species. Maybe you could say it could be evidence. I don't know how good it is, but I'm using it as evidence that there's other kinds of species. Sure, we grant that, but that doesn't tell you the changing of these things. It just tells you that you found something else in the ground.
Yeah, so not every piece of the scientific method has to be enclosed by every part of it. So I mentioned how a big part of the scientific theory is predictive power. So one of the reasons I brought up the Archaeopteryx is basically just to demonstrate that we can make predictions based on our observations, and then we can confirm them by digging up fossils. Now, in the case of can we conduct a controlled experiment, which also demonstrates evolution, that is absolutely true. So we've done experiments involving E. coli, for example. I think there's an ongoing experiment that's been in the process for at least 20 years where they're consistently taking different populations of E. coli, and they do this with other microorganisms too, and introduce different elements into their environment. Flies is another one, which have a short lifespan. So they'll take different populations or different groups of the same exact kind of fly, and then they'll introduce different variables to each group and see how the group responds to it. Maybe they start giving one group a certain kind of food so that that they don't normally eat, so that organisms, the types of flies who are able to digest it, tend to survive, so that we see new traits emerge over time, different adaptabilities to these new environments.
Okay, you said something there, and we'll move on, but that was a very generous chat. So isn't it possible for two models that are incompatible to predict the same phenomenon? Because you said before, well, in this one event, we predicted the thing, right? And so that verifies it. Well, no, isn't it the case that you could have two different, in this case, hypotheses? Let's say hypotheses. They're not really proper hypotheses, but colloquially, they're hypotheses. Isn't it true that two different models, and both could be wrong, have accurate predictions?
Can you give me when it comes to this specific example with Archaeopteryx, could you give me a competing hypothesis that could make the same prediction? Within this rock layer, we're going to find an organism that looks just like this.
That you could predict. Oh, that you could predict it, that it would show up there.
Well,
I would give you a counter. I would give you a counter is that they've also found a fair amount of things that show up in places that they predicted they wouldn't. So it's like all you need really is that one counter to demonstrate, well, your predictions could be wrong, your predictions could be right. But if the standard that you're using to predict can be wrong and it's demonstrated it could be wrong, then you're basically just kind of guessing and hoping you get it right. The question is whether or not two different models can be right about a prediction. And the answer is yes. The reason Clicker's answer is so accurate in science is because people, like, for instance, do you agree that scurvy is caused by the lack of vitamin C intake?
Yeah, that's my understanding of it. Yeah.
Okay. A lot of people understood that to be the case for many years, right? And they did because they did an experiment and they introduced vitamin C in certain ways and then they removed it. Well, over many years, we believe that. Well, there was a competing hypothesis that maybe it wasn't just that. Maybe that wasn't a high resolution enough. And as it turns out, many of us, including myself until just last year, believe that the lack of vitamin C causes scurvy. Well, it turns out that a similar prediction about the readiness and the freshness of meat and other foods actually plays in to what we now call scurvy, and it's not strictly just vitamin C. However, the vitamin C made predictions, right? But it was wrong. It wasn't to the high resolution. There was more involved, and now the statement vitamin C causes this is no longer the running hypothesis, not the running theory, but yet it was right as a predictive hypothesis for many years. That's an example of something being right about its predictions and being completely wrong later on, and showing that no, it's actually not enough to predict. The only arbiter for two competing hypotheses in natural science is an experiment, not predictions. An experiment, not predictions.
If I could just respond to that really quick. So what I was asking specifically for was with regards to Archaeopteryx. That was the example I came up with. Is there any hypothesis that you could come up with to predict we're going to find an organism that looks just like this in this specific rock layer?
Sure. If you learned enough about geology and you had a prediction of where the type of environment, certain things that functioned a certain way would show up, then you would be high likely to nail it on a couple occasions or more. Like let's imagine that for a second, birds, if they died, they happen to stay in the sky, right? Like there's some weird phenomenon where things that fly can be found where there's sky. And you're like, I'm going to predict that I'm going to find a bird where bird-like things occur. So you could do this with things, organisms that you think or know to live in water. And suddenly, if you find a place that once had water and you find an animal and you go, see, I knew it. I found an animal that used to be in water. Well, that would be easy considering that under both of our models, the large amount of the earth would be covered with water, right? So it's like you guys are just running and celebrating with these finds, but you never talk about when you misfire the prediction and find something in a layer where it's not supposed to belong. You just chalk that up to something changing as opposed to going, well, let's be honest with it. We like this model of finding things in the ground in different strata, but because of the way things layer and shift, that we know they layer and shift. We know the volcanoes and earthquakes and all sorts of things happen enough to push a mountain to the sky. You admitted in your opener. Well, like you could be right or wrong where you find things, right? Because you have a shifting environment, you have shifting layers. So I don't think that's a really good win. I honestly think evolution proponents should try to stick more to biological descriptions and explanations, because that's the thing that's going to try to convince someone like me. It's not going to be deep geological assumptions about something that's found. It's going to be, can you predict and demonstrate? Like, that's why I asked you about the hippo. Like, what would it take to predict a hippo is on its way to being a sea whale? I want to know that.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. And that kind of future prediction of evolution, I'm not aware that we can have. Now, you mentioned how all the time we find fossils where we wouldn't expect them. Do we ever find humans mixed in with dinosaur fossils?
Like large animals, you mean?
Do we ever find the fossil remains of modern humans mixed in with like a T-Rex?
I don't really know, but I don't grant a T-Rex anyway. I grant large animals, but I don't.
You don't think T-Rex is real?
No, I think large animals are found and they're largely constructed. The rest of them are constructed. They're fabricated, the rest of their bodies.
Really? So you think that a T-Rex is a fake animal? It's not even real?
No, I think what's found is a large animal, and then what's contrived is the thing called the T-Rex. You would admit it too, because guess what? You just admitted during this debate that taxonomy is totally invented and arbitrary, dude. You think me denying a T-Rex exists denies that there are certain animals that could be found and parts of them that are found that are large? No. So you're trying to do it's kind of like a well poisoning what you're doing, but really the only thing I'm denying is the narrative and the taxonomy of what you call dinosaurs, and what I'm accepting is large animals. And what you're doing is saying no, dinosaurs. Well, no, dinosaurs dinosaurs have their own special narrative, Jeb. I don't know if you know this, Jed, but like someone contrived of a dinosaur. I forget his name. He actually invented a dinosaur in his head before anyone found a dinosaur, right? How old are humans, by the way? How old are
About
humans?
300,000 years.
Great. And so 300,000 years, how are there any dinosaurs that are found at the surface? Like maybe something poking out, something pretty ancient. I don't know.
We're never going to find a rock layer that has fossilized dinosaurs mixed in with human fossils.
I didn't ask that. I did not ask that. I asked.
So you're asking, is it possible for an old rock layer to be towards the surface? That
Yes.
may be possible.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay, cool. If it's possible, right? I'm just wondering, like, was there something that had to have changed in the time frame where dinosaurs got really popular before advanced technology, where suddenly we're finding what's called dinosaurs shortly after someone invents the term, and we didn't find any of these in the past throughout 300,000 years of human civilizations, right? Not a single one found a dinosaur.
It's entirely possible people.
It's a peculiarity of the 1800s.
It's entirely possible that people did find dinosaur fossils and didn't know what they were. So that might be one of the reasons why people.
Okay.
Have you ever heard? Well, people think that ancient myths like dragons, people think, oh, dragons might be dinosaurs.
Dragons could have existed from an evolutionary.
So dragons could have existed, but dinosaurs definitely didn't exist.
No, what? No, you're not understanding me. I'm not talking about dinosaurs in reference to large animals existing. I already told you that exists. I'm telling you that
a dinosaur isn't just a large animal. So if we find a specific fossil, like a T-Rex skull fossilized, that belonged to some organism, right?
I just want to know if you think dragons are possible from an evolutionary view.
There's no evidence that it depends on what you mean by dragon.
A dragon, a large lizard that has the capacity, kind of like a bombardier beetle, to spit out combustive acid. Is that possible?
No, I don't think
that's not possible.
There's no evidence that the colloquial understanding of dragons was real. This giant flying lizard that breathes fire. There's no evidence of these. So what I'm saying is that it's possible people in ancient times might have found a dinosaur fossil and misinterpreted what it was and mythicized this big organism, because back then, maybe if they just found one fossil, they imagined what it could have looked like before we knew very much about fossilization and bone structure. But now that we have a better understanding, we're better at depicting how this animal stood up, how it walked, how it moved.
So you don't think, you deny that any dinosaurs could spit out combustive acid?
When you say the word dragon, that's kind of a loaded term. So
I know that's what's funny about it.
If we're saying a giant lizard that had wings and could breathe fire.
Wait a second. Dragon's a loaded term, but dinosaur isn't.
No, dinosaur is a category of organisms that we have actual evidence for. So we find a fossil, like a T-Rex fossil, that belonged to some organism, right? Do you think that Satan was burying these dinosaur fossils to trick us, or where do you think all these fossils came from?
What fossils? You mean the ones that are really small in parts that get reconstructed by a computer and then printed for museum retards to pay money and to pet? Are you talking about those?
I'm talking about the
Did you find a full?
Thousands.
Did you find a full? You found a fully intact, what you call a T-Rex with its little useless hands? You found that?
I have small.
Yeah, you found found a giant.
Every fossil, every dinosaur fossil is incomplete. You're never going to find a 100% skeleton, but a lot of organisms are symmetrical. So let's say you found one half. You can reliably estimate what the other half looked like, right? If you're missing a couple of ribs,
I understand.
You can fill in the gaps. So it's not like scientists are completely randomly making stuff up. If you find 30% of a skeleton, you can reconstruct what the rest of it looked like with fairly good accuracy.
Okay.
Let's move on, and I'm going to run through the rest of these fairly fast. Any responses going forward, short, precise, to the point.
Sure.
Kokomo with the big 16 says 16 Australian dollars for 16K subs. Yes, we hit 16 on our way in the door for this show. Jim Bob, I will catch up to you. Other guy says, I was evolved to send a higher super chat from my ancestors in chat. Jeff Clinton says he's toast already, laughing my ass off. I like my liver paired with fava beans and a nice Chianti. I didn't know Jim Bob started a cooking channel. Stop taking my money, Sarah. No, I will continue to do so. Sarah's Jedi mind tricks, forcing donos. I'm not sure what this question means. Regarding the arms race, if life began through asexual reproduction, what evo pressure would force a penile nub to spawn? Where would the new DNA info come from? This also has to apply to the proto-vag.
Proto-vag, yeah.
Yeah, I've heard this this argument before. Essentially, what he's getting at is how did sexual reproduction arise from asexual reproduction? Sexual reproduction has a lot of benefits that are missing out from asexual reproduction. So if you and another individual are reproducing and creating offspring, you're making basically a hybrid of your DNA. So your child shares half of the genome of each of your parents, which means they're more genetically diverse, which could make them better suited at avoiding disease. So a lot of organisms also are capable of asexual and sexual reproduction at the same time. So some animals or some organisms can do both. So there didn't need to be all of a sudden an asexual parent gave birth to a sexual reproducing child. This can also be something that exists simultaneously, like giving birth underwater and outside the water.
Okay. Sarcastic Saint says, what do you call it when chemicals in a primordial soup evolve into Darwinist soup to nuts? Besides links, what else was Darwin missing? His marbles. Evolution is the best played joke on us. Fair enough.
From goo to the zoo to you.
Jed, explain how Jim Bob and I are in the same environment, but he evolved to have thick, luscious locks, and I evolved to have a skullet. Please explain so I can tell my wife.
A skullet.
Jim Bob, you've got amazing hair, my guy. Oh, it's so luscious.
Skullet.
Fair enough. Aren't genetic mutations and environmental changes independent processes? Doesn't that make it near impossible for them to overlap in an apparent dependent fashion?
Yeah, they are independent processes, but they affect each other. So two independent variables happen at the same time, and then they have a relationship with one another. So random mutations are affected by natural selection or the environment.
I just want to add to that. A key moment there was, first of all, just the biology is massive unlikelihood stories, like the mathematics of one thing even being triggered, but maintaining to the point where it develops into, in this case, a liver was my example. The whole other part clicker to that was there's this environment that also is related. And at least I got Jed to admit that if you add a variable to an already unlikely scenario, you're actually increasing the unlikelihood of that. This is just basic stochastics. Like you add variables, it makes it less likely for things to happen because different things can change. So the clicker is pointing to something way deeper with the separation of the environment and the mutations. Even if they affect each other, they both change. They're not related in their changes. Like the environment doesn't change based on the mutations, but the mutations have to lead toward an advantage accidentally to suit the environment. That's just like total accident. Anyway.
If I can just add, sometimes an organism sometimes mutations can change the environment. So in the case of a beaver, it constructs a dam, which drastically changes the environment around it, and other organisms have to adapt accordingly. So sometimes animals, it's called niche creation. Animals create their own niches to live inside of.
Fair enough. Sarcastic Saint says, if evolution were a game, some people are still on level 1. Evolution gave us brains, but some are still buffering. Evolution gave us speech. Sarcasm was a bonus. Darwin saw YouTube and reconsidered. John Smith says, none of us have evolved enough to laugh at the word poop. He.
You're not allowed to say that word.
Poop?
Just kidding.
On YouTube.
I was like, really?
Yeah, the video will get flagged. It's a banned word.
Just kidding.
Fair enough. What do you call a politician with a clear conscience? An Alzheimer's patient. Why don't politicians listen to their conscience? They don't like taking advice from complete strangers. Biden jokes. Eli Nick says evolutionists would be honest to admit their theory is at best no less crazy than the creation story, except we have recorded human testimony while they have speculation over billions of years. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say that we don't have human testimony is incredibly unreliable. What we have is people making stuff up and writing it down in an ancient book. And then thousands of years later, other people say, look, it's written down in a book, so it must be true. Whereas evolution and science is based on observations of reality and not a book that we assume is true because it was divinely inspired.
Okay. Clicker says robots can come from humans. AI will come from humans. Is that evolution?
No.
It's not. I actually wanted to ask you a question about something similar, Jed. Do you think that that beliefs are an evolutionary trait selected for?
I think the tendency to form certain beliefs may be evolutionary selected for. So, for example, humans are pattern seekers. So, or an example might be humans are really, they like to apply agency where there may not be any. So we see a rustling in the bushes. We think, oh, maybe there's a lion behind that bush. It's going to try to hurt us. So we run away. Now, whether it's a lion or not, we're still going to survive if we run away. So the belief that there was agency there aided in our survival, even though it's kind of insufficient evidence to conclude that there is.
Let me just ask you
agency.
more directly. Do you think we evolved to believe in God?
Did we evolve to believe in God? We might have been. I don't see any evidence of that necessarily.
Well, I mean, how could it not be the case if believing in God aids to survival? How could that not be a trait selected for neurologically?
Well, going back to the agency, if humans assume agency where there is none, like the rustling in the bushes, we could also apply agency to something like lightning. We see lightning in the sky, we think the gods are mad at us, so they're going to zap us with electricity. Where really, once we actually find out what the explanation is, there's no agency there at all. Similarly, people used to think, oh, if we perform certain activities, the gods will favor our actions. They're going to make it rain if we do certain things. So humans are pattern seekers. They love seeking these patterns.
So you're saying that believing in fiction is a trait that was selected for?
Potentially. I'm saying assuming agency where there is none may be a trait that was selected for.
Well, let's say assuming something that exists, not just agency, assuming anything exists that's not really there. You're saying humans do that?
Repeat the question one more time so I understand it fully.
Do you think humans evolved to believe things exist that aren't really there?
The degree to which evolution plays a role in the belief in God, I'm not sure about.
Not just God, anything that exists. For instance, do you believe human rights exist?
Rights are something that humans have made up.
Well, no,
so
I asked if
they're
exist.
Based on. Sure. So human rights are largely based on empathy, which is an evolved trait. So empathy is an emotion that we have.
I asked you.
I know. I brought empathy up because
rights,
it relates to.
No, human empathy is just a signal that you could be right or wrong about someone's emotion. A lot of times, scientifically, it's proven that we project what someone's feeling from our past because they're making a face that we recognize, and often we're wrong. That has nothing to do with the question. Do you believe human rights exist actually, or are they a fiction?
What do you mean by fiction?
They're just made up. They don't exist in the world. There's no reason to believe they exist. Just like your view of God. There's not a good reason to believe God exists. I'm asking you, is there any good reason for you to believe rights exist?
Sure. Human rights are laws that humans make up. So if humans were erased from existence, human rights wouldn't exist either.
Laws are made without human rights as well. So that's not true that they're just laws. I agree that laws can be made up, which is backed by force. But the reason I'm bringing this up is that I have a feeling that your epistemic system that often critiques God, beliefs and things that don't exist from your view, I think you somehow get around it when you appeal to things like rights. That's why I'm trying to ask you directly. Are you someone who touts human rights and goes like, these people are trying to take my rights? Are you that kind of guy? I haven't watched enough of you. I'm just actually honestly asking you.
Yeah, what I tend to appeal to is well-being. which is based in empathy, which is why I brought it up. So empathy and the desire to enhance the well-being of people around me is what fuels a lot of my my desire to see fairness in the world.
Okay, so if it were the case that believing in certain gods increased well-being, would you then no longer argue against those things morally? Like, would you just stop arguing against them? If you were convinced, or if it were the case that belief in God increased people's well-being, would you then lay off trying to get people to not believe in God or challenging them? Or?
There may be certain environments where a belief in God, or at least pretending to believe in God, could aid in your survival. So like, or at least benefit you in some way. Like, for example, in prison, there's a really big religious population. The vast majority of people in prison are religious. Is that because religious people commit more crimes? Maybe not. Maybe it's because if you're religious, you get to go to a church service and get out of your cell for an extra hour every week. So maybe people pretend to be religious so they can do this extra activity for fun. Or if you're in some Muslim-dominated country where if you go around yelling how Allah doesn't exist and Muhammad liked him young, your well-being is now at risk. So now it's in your best interest to keep your mouth shut about your beliefs.
Well, I think it sounds like the answer to your question is yes. If it demonstrated largely that belief in God increased well-being, then you wouldn't make an argument morally against it, being that your whole standard for like rights and stuff is based on well-being.
Wrap it up.
If God existed, I would still advocate for well-being as a justification for human rights. But if my life was at risk by announcing that I didn't believe in God, I would lie and say I believed in God in order to save my own life.
Okay, we can move on.
I know it's not what you asked, but that's
not really what I'm pointing to. What I'm pointing to is there's a number of people who live and experience that their well-being is increased and maintained through their theological practices and their beliefs. If it's the case that it produces well-being for them and it's a large amount of people, I'm asking from your view, what your position would then be. You should actually advocate for those instances.
What you're proposing is a hypothetical that I don't think matches reality. In reality, religion, while it does benefit some people in some situations, it's a net negative over society at large.
That's a different debate.
Oh, yeah.
I'm willing to have. Sure.
I'm happy to set that up. Sarah, you want to moderate that one next time?
We could do another round.
Two on two.
Oh, you want to do a mod Monday? Okay. All right.
Sure.
Send me the prompt again later, Jim Bob, and we'll set it up with some partners and stuff. All right. I'm going to do speed reading here. I know everybody backstage is waiting very patiently. Tagauch, water sex, mermaids, let's go. Screaming beagle paying the tomato tax. Thank you kindly. Crucible Crusader says, did Jed evolve from a banana fruitcake? LOL. And Kissy Cat... you can respond to
I was going to respond and just say, we already went over this, but no, bananas are our cousins, not our ancestors.
Fair enough. I'm going to feel bad eating another banana now. Kissy Cat sending in not 10, not 20, but 30, and then 40, and then 50, and then 60, and then 70 to complete the goal. Tomatoes in the chat for Kissy Cat, and also Almighty Nate to prevent the chat from taking your L for the night, because I was about to hand deliver a whole lot of them to you guys. Shout out to Almighty Nate. Tomatoes in the chat once more. Casual Crip says, I missed the entire debate. Take my money. Fair enough. I will do that. Sean says, does Jim Bob believe that he has evolved as a streamer over time?
Colloquially, yes.
Yeah, individuals don't evolve. Populations do.
That's fair.
But what are wait a second. But what are populations made of?
Groups of individuals. So evolution is defined as the change in allele frequency over time. So allele frequency can only exist in a population.
Right. That's why you can't actually, from the evolutionary view, tell me what produced the phenomenon of populations, because you actually need populations to exist to then describe what evolution is, right? We ask you, is it true that populations are some sort of phenomenon produced by evolution? You have to say yes. And yet when we say, well, what produce, populations?
Reproduction.
Say, well, no, that is reproduction is population.
You don't need a population for reproduction. All you need is one self-replicating organism.
Right. Now you have to go from one self-replicating organism to all these other populations, right?
Yeah, we have demonstrated that single cell organisms can evolve into multi-cell organisms. I brought this up in my closing statement about snowflake yeast, where one mutation, I wrote it down somewhere. One mutation in ACE2, the ACE2 gene mutated so that instead of replicating and then the cells being separate, now they're stuck together. So the yeast became a multicellular organism instead of single cell.
Was it multicellular yeast?
Yeah.
Yeah. It gets you nowhere, dude.
Yeah. So this is, you're basically saying because it's still yeast, therefore it didn't evolve. But we went from single cell organism to multi-cell organism. So if that's not macroevolution, I don't know what is. But because of the law of monophyly, it's always going to be, you're never going to have a daughter organism that's the different species as the parent.
Charlie says evolution is a mystery full of change that no one sees. Clock makes a full of history. Yesterday's too long ago. Don't agree with what I know. Ooh, we got Dr. Seuss in the chat. The decades-old bacteria experiment is still bacteria, even though bacteria lifespans are much shorter. This has been going on for thousands of generations with controls.
Now, I hear a response from evolution deniers a lot about bacteria experiments. Oh, it's still bacteria. It never became anything other than bacteria, without realizing that bacteria is a category of organisms like eukaryotes. So we see tons and tons of diversity amongst bacteria. If someone were to claim all bacteria shares a common ancestor, that's a huge endorsement of evolution. Just because we all label them bacteria, we label tons of things eukaryotes: humans, bananas, trees, hippos, whales. These are all eukaryotes. So saying all bacteria shares a common ancestor would be to embrace the evolution of all eukaryotes as well.
Okay.
I would just add, though, the bacteria situations, they're all demonstrating some sort of degradation. It's actually, they introduce things to bacteria. Yes, they change, but you guys selling change as if it's like producing some sort of new advantageous system or scenario is just not, it's just not true. You guys just introduce things to bacteria, watch it change, and you go, look, it's basically changing. And you're like, yeah, you're introducing things and it's responding to the things you're introducing, but over time, it doesn't advance to anywhere. It actually degrades over time. It's not advantageous.
They're not.
It's better suited for the new environment you created.
Yeah, so it requires a human oversight to manipulate and play Sims with biology, and that's your argument for evolution, that it happens without the human. That's not reasonable.
Yeah, the experiments are a way to control the variables, but the variables that we see in nature are through nature itself. So nature presents variables which change organisms over time because environments are constantly changing.
AJ says, I want a hippopotamus for Christmas. Fair enough. I want my 2 front teeth. Cool says, I'm a dinosaur. Mrs. Wilson asks, how did T-Rex have sex? Have the scientists reconstructed
It's at a kids museum, I think. I saw it. Yeah, in Portland.
That's actually an interesting question. Yeah, I'd be curious too. You know, a lot of birds have sex in the air, mid-flight, but T-Rex probably couldn't fly. So
that's fair. Okay, I'm going to hold the rest and we'll get to them during open panel. I just want to move it along. We've spent the last hour going through the super chats, and I think the panel is ready to go. But we'll get through them. I'll have to just interrupt the panel a few times. Gentlemen, buckle up, strap in. We're going to have some fun. I'm going to go ahead and lay it out real quick. If everyone can just hold for me for a minute. The gauntlet is officially open. I'll give you about 5 minutes to start heading over there. If the mods could start dropping that link in the chat, that would be incredibly helpful. I'm going to try to make a swift move to shut down the tomato side. Start moving to the gauntlet. If you don't know where it is, the mods can help you. Outside of that, I will get through the super chats. I'm going to let the panel run for just a little bit, and then we'll start moving back into them to interrupt. All right, who would like to? Let's see, Evan, ask your question. I know you got one, and we got a lot of people backstage hanging out. So,
all right, I'll make it quick. To Jed, the horseshoe crab is said to have been evolved 250 million years ago, and it hasn't changed, and it has remained around that entire time. How is that possible where it wouldn't be outcompeted or by something that evolved in a way that was superior to the horseshoe crab in that time, considering that incredibly long period of time that's been around?
Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, so with many organisms, the horseshoe crab, we talked about sharks earlier, and crocodiles, animals that are really well suited to their environment and really good at what they do, don't need to evolve. There's no selection pressure that's put on them to change in some way. So if the beach is always a very similar environment for the horseshoe crab, it's a robust organism that survives well in its given environment. It doesn't need to change or evolve into anything else because it's already well suited for survival. Just like crocodiles and sharks, these organisms which are great at their specific niche don't need to change.
Dude, evolution, from your own words, I correct you during the debate. Evolution the mutation doesn't occur out of a need. It occurs as a random thing that happens, and a random thing produces something that only after time you look back and goes, oh, that was a really advantageous accident that happened. You're saying, well, the horseshoe crab doesn't need to because it's doing just fine. No. Evan's essentially asking, why didn't the horseshoe crab experience random mutation? Because the environment, the water doesn't say, hey, I'm water. Hey, there's sharks around and there's other things getting better than you. You better step up your game, bro. Insert random mutation. That's not what evolution assumes.
Because
evolution
mutation only takes over if it's advantageous.
Yeah, isn't it possible that it was that there were changes that were emerging, and those changes just happened to be less advantageous than?
Do you understand what I just said? Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand it. So it's a process called
No.
It's called punctuated equilibrium. So this is exactly that. So there's random mutations that are actually deleterious because if it's already well suited to its environment, it is constantly mutating. The mutations didn't stop. But any mutation that changes it in some drastic way, those organisms are going to die off because now it's less suited to a static environment.
How does an organism receive the signal that it needs a mutation, sir?
The mutations are random. They happen randomly.
Contradiction.
That's what I've been saying the entire time. The mutations are random, and the selection pressure is not random. But in this case, if the environment stays the same, then mutations that change it in some big way, they don't get passed on to the next generation.
Dude, that's a contradiction. You can't say in one sentence, the horseshoe crab didn't evolve because it didn't need to, and also say that all mutations are just random. Because if all mutations are random, they wouldn't be based on need. They would be based on accident, and then time going by and looking at the accident and calling it a happy accident. That's not a need. That's an accident.
Yeah, the selection pressure is the environment. So if the environment doesn't change, and then the organism doesn't need to change either. So these mutations that are neutral may be passed on to the next generation or no change at all. And then the mutations that are all other mutations are deleterious because if it's already well suited for its environment, it's already great at its niche, it doesn't need to change in order to be better at survival. So the mutations are still happening. They're still random mutations. And nature is non-randomly selecting for organisms that have fewer mutations.
Wait, wouldn't that mean that all the mutations on that crab, since it hit that point, have all been advantageous to its environment? In other words, it's just been a string of perfect mutations which never caused it to have natural selection act upon it.
No, it doesn't need advantageous mutations. All it needs to do is maintain the same phenotype that it has now. So it undergoes mutations, but the organisms that are drastically different might tend to die off because it's already hyper specialized to its niche.
Yeah, so the mutations on this crab have all somehow stayed within a range where the selection pressures have no effect, essentially is what you're saying. It's all been good mutations and there's been no deleterious mutations.
No,
that's what you're saying for
not
millions of
No.
years.
There are still deleterious mutations, and those organisms die off. And the environment is still providing
hold on,
pressure.
let's
It's
make
still
a
the same
question.
level of pressure.
If it's deleterious, it's only deleterious based on the environment. So
Right.
if the crab has survived in the same state for millions of years, that means there actually hasn't been any quote unquote deleterious mutations, because if there had been, which can only be determined by the environment changing or staying the same and the random mutation being disadvantageous, then
You get how those would die
the
out, though,
crab
right?
would-
If
would
the
die
crabs are
out.
all black and
Yeah,
all of a
you're
sudden one
basically
is born
saying that-
white and something can see it easily and it dies before it can mate, you can understand how a deleterious mutation wouldn't make it further in the population, right?
Yeah, or they get
But then
discriminated.
he's saying that the crab has basically
No, there are
has
individuals
only
in the
had-
population that are going to be affected by deleterious mutations. The population
Hey,
as a whole isn't going to have this trait passed on to it, which is what evolution is talking about. It's
Yeah,
saying
but
within
Corinth-
the species is this trait going to be continued to go on for an extended period of time.
Corinth, I know, but it sounds like there were two claims from Jed here, because he was saying, well, it did the horseshoe crab stayed the same because it didn't need to experience a mutation in response to the external stimuli
He's
called
talking
the
about the
environment. right?
population as a whole in the first statement.
That's not the right way to think about it.
The first
It's
statement
always
he's using
been-
horseshoe crabs as a species did not need to change. They're already to a sufficient threshold of fitness for their environment.
I know, but that assumes that evolution happens when it needs to, rather than it happens randomly.
Natural selection does. So what he's saying is then the mutations that happen to a given horseshoe crab is going to be less fit to the environment. It's going to be deleterious. That lineage from that horseshoe crab that had the deleterious mutation is going to die off sooner.
Look,
so
it's really
horseshoe
simple.
crabs as a species are not going to pass this on, while deleterious mutations within a given individual.
We're talking Corinth, we're talking about what triggers a mutation. It sounds like when Jed says, well, no
Errors
mutations
in
happen.
copying of RNA. Errors in copying
We're
of
not
RNA
talking
are going to
about
cause
what-
codons
Cancer.
through things like duplication events, deletion events, things like this. Whether or not they get passed on within a population to a sufficient degree that it becomes a trait of the species is going to be due to natural selection. That was
Let me
what Jed
ask
was
in a
talking
simple.
about,
Let me
right,
ask in
Jed?
a simple. Let me ask in a very simple question. Like, if I start losing my eyesight, right, and I'm just an animal, and I'm not a human. I'm just an animal loses my eyesight. Losing my eyesight, does that have any effect of whether or not I'm going to trigger a random mutation to counter the loss of eyesight?
No, mutations and evolution doesn't happen within an individual. They happen within populations. Now, we
That are
do
made
see
of individuals.
organisms. We see
It's
organisms that
definitely more
lose their
genetic.
eyesight, and it can be beneficial. So there's fish that live in super, super deep water. They lose their ability to see, and that's actually beneficial for them because the production of eyes is really costly. You need more food to keep your eyes working. They can get infected. We also see animals living in caves that lose their eyesight. They just either can't see or they lose their eyes completely, and that can be beneficial because they're in a pitch dark environment.
Before anybody
on.
responds, I'm just going to let everybody know that's watching on the tomato side. I'm shutting down tomato and it's going to raid you over to the gauntlet. Otherwise, I'm dropping the link in the chat for you now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Just a
Hey
quick
Jed,
question.
I've got a question for you. I
Okay.
did hear you